Hey everyone, it's your buddy back again with another exciting fanfic, which is What If Naruto Gave Up on Sakura just after joining Team 7 Part 3. If you enjoy this story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more fanfics like this. Now, let's dive right into the fanfic. He winced as a new wave of pain invaded his body, as he reached his arms behind him to reach the senbon lodged in his back, as back muscles tensed from his reaching behind him, drawing the senbon deeper. Eventually he was able to yank them out, roughly causing him to wince in pain. Meanwhile, Naruto's eyes twitched at his teammates' show of gratefulness, or rather the lack of it. This was the thanks he gets for saving his SS. But Naruto quickly focused his eyes back on their enemy, as it was no time for something so trivial. There were more important things to worry about, like their masked opponent that was now facing them, having recovered from the punch. The masked ninja had now dispersed the ice mirrors, seeing that Sasuke had escaped the technique. Naruto watched the enemy ninja like a hawk, while whispering a warning to Sasuke. "We can't let him form the mirrors again," Naruto warned Sasuke, who nodded in agreement as he had already experienced the power of that technique firsthand. And no, it was best not to get caught up in it again. Naruto's eyes narrowed as Haku lifted his hands in front of him to form a seal. The blonde immediately moved to attack to stop the masked ninja's attempt to reform the mirrors. The best way to so was to keep the masked ninja from making hand seals by keeping him busy. And that was what Naruto planned to do. To Sasuke, the blonde was a blur, as the prideful Uchiha found himself barely able to keep up with Naruto's speed. Fast. Sasuke thought, slightly shocked, as another dent was put in his pride by his dead last teammate once again. Haku was quick to dodge Naruto's first several punches, but could not dodge the following kick to the gut. Grunting from having the air forced out of his lungs, Haku flew backwards into the ground. Not giving the masked ninja a chance to recover, Naruto pressed the attack while his enemy was down on the ground. The blonde sprung himself into the air, before using the gravity and his weight to enhance the power in his kick down at Haku, who was sprawled out on the ground on his back. Frantically rolling to the side to dodge, Haku barely escaped the kick that had been aimed at his head. The concrete cracked slightly from the force of the kick where Naruto landed the kick. Haku breathed heavily from the intensity of the blonde's attack, as he rolled onto his feet with the momentum, while simultaneously drawing several senbon from a pouch hidden under his sleeve. He launched the senbon at Naruto, but the spiky-haired blonde was no longer there. Haku's eyes widened as Naruto was suddenly in front of him. By pure reflex, he barely managed to backflip away over a leg sweep, but was caught once again by a follow-up palm strike to the stomach. Haku coughed out some blood, but remained standing, only sliding back several feet from the force of the hit. Ignoring the pain, Haku quickly analyzed the blonde's skill. The spiky-haired boy's taijutsu was good, even though a bit less refined as his previous opponent. Though what he lacked in grace, he made up for it with plenty of power and speed. In any case, it was certainly better than his own measly skills at taijutsu, as he was more of a mid to long-range fighter. Not to mention that every time he tried to block Naruto's attacks, his arms would go numb. It wasn't enough to disable his limbs, but good enough to weaken his limbs for a few seconds. It was obvious that, like him, the blonde had some knowledge of the human anatomy and pressure points. But where he used senbon to hit the points from a distance, the blonde genin incorporated his knowledge into his taijutsu. He was lucky that the spiky-haired blonde seemed to be relatively new to this taijutsu style, as even though his pressure point striking accuracy was quite good, he was unable to make anything more than a few glancing blows due to his inexperience, which showed through clearly. The blonde often had to compensate at times with using a taijutsu fighting style common in the ninja world. And it showed clearly that the blonde had not yet fully mastered the ability to seamlessly blend both styles of taijutsu together. But much of the blonde's deficiencies stem from the fact that he lacked combat experience. Haku was well aware that the longer they fought, the better the blonde became. He could practically feel the blonde's improvements. Realizing that close-range combat was disadvantageous for him, Haku did his best to keep some distance from the blonde ninja. But Naruto was unrelenting in his attacking, never giving him any moment's rest. Every time Haku put some distance between them, Naruto would close it with his superior speed. Haku found himself forced to jump into the air as Naruto tried to sweep his legs from under him. Extending his leg, the masked nin used the momentum of his jump to counter with a kick at Naruto's chin. Naruto merely leaned his head to the side before using another palm strike which sent Haku straight at Sasuke. Not wanting Naruto to steal the spotlight, Sasuke took that as his cue to rejoin the fight. On the sidelines, Kakashi felt somewhat relieved. With Zabuza blocking the way, he was unable to help Sasuke. Even if he went around Zabuza to help, the former Kiri ninja would attack Tazuna while he was helping Sasuke. And since his mission was to protect Tazuna, abandoning Tazuna was unacceptable. Luckily, Naruto managed to solve his dilemma. Through the mist, he could only see glimpses of the ongoing fight with his two male genins. He was surprised at how well they were able to handle themselves, Naruto in particular. He was well aware of the fact that Naruto had improved a lot ever since the formation of Team 7. But he had never expected this much growth in such a short time. Though for him, it was hard to tell through the thick mist, Naruto's speed seemed to be even faster than Sasuke. With the both of them fighting the masked ninja, Kakashi was confident that they could hold their own as long as they did not allow the fake hunter nin to reform those ice mirrors. And the boys seemed to have come to the same conclusion judging by the intensity of their combined attack. Having some of his worries lifted, Kakashi put his entire focus back onto the man in front of him. With Kakashi finally having regained his resolve, he was ready to fight. As the white-haired Junin and Zabuza looked ready to finally begin their fight, Haku was slowly beginning to get desperate. With Sasuke having rejoined the fight, the masked ninja found himself losing. He even had to resort to using much of his stock of Senbon just to force the two genin to keep their distance so he could avoid any critical blows. It worked to some degree, letting him escape any serious harm, but unfortunately did not provide enough time for him to recast his jutsu. Fighting two opponents that were each individually faster than him was taking its toll on his stamina. Haku knew that he could not let the battle drag on any further. He simply did not have the stamina to fight both ninja at the same time. At least not in a taijutsu match. But they weren't giving him any time to form seals to use ninjutsu or genjutsu. He understood that the Konoha genins were using their numbers advantage to wear him out with non-stop attacks. There was one way that he could turn the fight around, and that was to reform and trap both genins in his ice mirrors. His speed within the mirrors surpasses both of the Konoha ninjas, and would ensure his victory in this fight if he could do so. The problem was that there was not enough time between the gaps in their attacks for him to form the hand seals. Even though he had managed to avoid critical blows with his experience, at this rate, it would only be a matter of time before he was defeated. If he were to reform the mirrors, he would need to take a big risk. As the fight continued, Naruto began to step back on his attacks while letting Sasuke take the lead. Meanwhile, he put some of his attention to observe Haku's movements. The fight had lasted more than 10 minutes now. But neither he nor Sasuke had managed to land any damaging blows. And Haku avoided him like a plague, clearly intimidated by his ability to attack pressure points, spending more of his time fighting off Sasuke instead. Much of the time, Haku would purposely maneuver himself so that Sasuke would get in his way so that it would make it hard to fully take advantage of outnumbering the masked ninja 2-1. Though that wasn't much of a problem for the two teammates. And Naruto gained a new appreciation of why Kakashi had been so adamant about developing good teamwork. The teamwork building exercises they had gone through finally paid off, as the two of them were able to coordinate with each other well enough to not get in the other's way. And Naruto could see Haku's defenses slowly beginning to crumble. But he knew that it was because of their imminent victory that they had to beware, as desperate times called for desperate measures. And Haku was definitely desperate enough to try something reckless to turn the tide of the fight. Deciding that the best defense was offense, the blonde genin stepped up the pressure on the fake Kiri nin by bringing in supplementary ninjutsu into their fight, which had so far been a test of taijutsu skill. Letting Sasuke attack from the front to distract Haku for a moment, Naruto formed several hand seals from out of sight, channeling chakra to execute the Shunshin no Jutsu. In an instant, the white-cloaked figure disappeared from sight and reappeared in a burst of incredible speed directly behind their masked enemy. Sensing a presence moving behind him, Haku turned to face Naruto. But it was already too late for him. Faster than Haku could react, the blonde ninja swung a kunai in an arc, the weapon slicing through flesh. A spurt of blood sprayed out from the wound and onto the ground. Though Naruto had been skilled enough to avoid getting any of the blood on himself, the smell of blood invaded their nose, though Naruto found that it only seemed to increase his excitement for battle. He knew that after the fight, he would feel somewhat bad for causing his opponent serious harm, but at the moment, he didn't care. Perhaps it was the adrenaline pumping through his body, or just because it was in the heat of the moment. It didn't matter to him. All Naruto knew was that they had to win. The two Konoha ninjas watched as Haku's body fell to the ground and sliding along the concrete lying on his side. They paused, eyeing Haku's bleeding form before giving each other a triumphant grin. But they know that the wound, while serious, was not lethal. Naruto looked briefly to Sasuke, who nodded, and they moved slowly and cautiously in unison towards Haku to make sure he was out of the fight. But before they could reach Haku, their eyes bulged out of their sockets in alarm. Their eyes darted left and right, trying to figure out if their eyes were deceiving them. They mentally berated themselves as they realized that it was not an illusion. They were surrounded by ice mirrors. Naruto swallowed dryly in nervousness. A million thoughts raced through his head, trying to figure out how it had happened. How did they not notice it until it was too late? Shit. He took the hit on purpose so he could form those mirrors. Naruto thought with some awe. Even though he had expected their enemy to try something desperate and possibly reckless, he would have never imagined something like this. He and Sasuke had thought they had thwarted Haku's every attempt to recreate the mirrors. But going so far as to willingly take a potentially lethal blow just to turn the fight around. But Naruto couldn't help but to mentally applaud Haku, as it had done the trick despite how desperate the move had been. And he had to admire how well calculated and executed it had been, especially under the amount of pressure the two of them put the masked ninja under. By taking a serious hit to the chest, both he and Sasuke had momentarily paused in their attack at the sight of their opponent heavily injured lying on the floor. And taking advantage of their momentary lapse in their attack, Haku had rolled onto his side, so that his back was facing the two of them. And by doing so, the masked ninja was able to form the seals to his jutsu unseen during their short pause. Haku eventually rose to his feet, his left hand clutched his chest wound. The two Konoha genins could see a fairly large amount of blood seep from the wound in between his fingers. Noticing the bending of the knees in his enemy, Naruto realized that Haku was trying to dive towards a mirror. Willing his body out of his shock, he moved desperately to intercept Haku before the ninja could get to safety inside the mirrors. But he was unable to react quickly enough. Although safe inside his mirrors, Haku was now breathing raggedly. He lifted his hand that held his wound in front of him to see it covered entirely in blood. He took a couple of deep breaths, though not too deep, to ensure the rising of his chest when breathing deeply would not aggravate his wound further until the bleeding slowed down. His plan had worked as he had hoped and allowed him to recast the Makio Hyosho once more. But not without its price. By taking the blow to the chest, he was slowly losing a fair bit of blood. Although his situation could have been a lot worse. If he hadn't anticipated the attack and leaned away from the kunai at the last moment, he would have gotten a much deeper wound. As it was now, his wound was not too serious. But nevertheless, without medical attention, the blood loss would eventually become a factor that could lead to his defeat. He could already feel his strength zapping away. Haku made the conclusion that he needed to end the fight as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Sasuke was contemplating a new strategy now that the situation has changed. These mirrors are made from ice, then. Making the logical conclusion, the raven-haired boy quickly formed several seals with his hands and called out the name of his jutsu. Kaden. Gukaku no Jutsu. A large fireball raced from his mouth towards the mirrors, seeking to destroy everything in its path. But as the flames subsided, Sasuke found himself jaw-dropping at the sight. Not only did his jutsu not melt the ice like he had expected, but it did absolutely no damage at all. It won't melt with that kind of firepower. Haku explained. Seeing his teammates' failed attempt to destroy the mirrors, Naruto grounded his teeth in frustration. Inside these mirrors, Haku held the complete advantage. Although he haven't yet experienced the power of these mirrors firsthand, he had managed to get a glimpse of its capabilities earlier. He didn't know how the technique worked, neither did he care. All he knew was that their opponent could somehow travel between these ice mirrors at extremely high speeds that were as fast if not faster than when he used Shunshin no Jutsu, and without the drawbacks. As Shunshin no Jutsu temporarily increases the user's speed and reflex to incredible levels, the user's eyes could not keep up with their own movements, limiting their maneuverability and ability to react to sudden changes. Not to mention the strain placed on the body was quite intense. As such, it was mostly used as a defensive maneuver to escape an enemy, or as a one-shot attack. As an offensive jutsu, Shunshin no Jutsu was likened to Batojutsu within the realm of Kenjutsu, in which the initial swing of the sword would provide additional power and speed, but in the case that the attack failed, it would leave the user completely open to attacks. Somehow, the masked nin's technique did not have these drawbacks. Haku's maneuverability at that kind of speed was higher with these mirrors than with Shunshin no Jutsu. And his ability to react to change was something Naruto had thought impossible unless Haku's natural speed had been much higher, that his body and eyes were already accustomed to moving at that kind of speed. Then, Haku also seemed to be able to travel through these mirrors with far less strain on the body than Shunshin no Jutsu. Though he did negate that somewhat by injuring the masked ninja, as constant movement would further aggravate the wound. In any case, Naruto was well aware that at their level, they can't hope to match the masked nin's speed. And neither would they be able to escape the mirrors again, at least not without some form of distraction. But now that Haku had trapped them, there was no way he would let them escape so easily. In their disadvantageous position, Naruto knew that staying in the defensive was the best choice until they could hopefully find a weakness in Haku's technique. Attacking now would only be a waste of chakra, unless he was able to destroy the mirrors. And he was not arrogant enough to think that his own Kaden Jutsu packed more of a punch than his teammates. Nevertheless, their strategy remained the same. Wear the enemy down. Though staying alive while doing so would be the hard part. But with the wound he had inflicted on their enemy, it might give them a chance. If they could last long enough. Naruto quickly formed two clones, positioning them each back to back with Sasuke and himself, before Haku attacked. This way, they could limit the number of directions Haku could attack from, making it much easier for them to defend themselves. This was crucial for them if they wanted to be able to defend themselves long enough against Haku's incredible speed. Then, without any warning, Haku attacked. Senbon rained from every conceivable direction, and the Konoha ninjas found themselves hard-pressed to even defend themselves. Naruto was doing a somewhat better job of it, as with the help of his clone to cover his back, he was able to block several Senbon with a kunai before he was forced to dive to the side. He suffered from several minor scratches where Senbon grazed him when he was unable to completely deflect or dodge the Senbon, but escaped relatively unscathed. Though having been forced to dodge, the clone behind him sustained damage and dispersed. Sasuke on the other hand wasn't doing quite as well. Unlike Naruto whom had experience using Shunshin no Jutsu, his eyes were less accustomed to following this kind of speed. Unable to handle even his side, his clone was dispersed almost instantly. And he had sustained some injuries, although he was somehow able to avoid being hit in the vitals. Naruto frowned as he realized that Sasuke was just sitting duck at the moment. He needed to protect Sasuke while prolonging the fight so Sasuke would have a chance to get his eyes used to this speed. Having survived the first assault, Sasuke was already breathing heavily. He had managed to see undistinguishable blurs that was Haku's movements, unlike before where he could not see anything at all. The raven-haired boy regained some confidence in himself as he was certain that his eyes were slowly adjusting to tracking high-speed movement. Meanwhile, Haku was becoming frustrated. The two Konoha genins performed better than he had expected, and had managed to survive his attack even though he had aimed to incapacitate them quickly to end the fight. This is taking too long, Haku thought to himself. There was a new factor that he had not managed to anticipate when creating his plan. Under constant high-speed movement, blood flowed out of his wound quicker than expected. And it was tiring him quickly, at an exponential rate. He could feel his strength slipping away. And the once shiningly clean ice mirrors were now decorated with spots of blood wherever Haku had been. Seeing the intensity of Haku's last assault, Naruto became aware that Haku aimed to end the fight quickly. It was obvious that the wound he inflicted was weakening him already. Quickly reforming another two clones, Naruto once again set them back to back with himself and his teammate. The blonde's eye darted left and right, trying his hardest to locate the masked ninja through the illusions caused by the reflection of the mirrors. There, Naruto's eyes were barely able to follow Haku's movements, finding the masked ninja not much more than a blur to his eyes. But it was enough. He had discovered a single flaw to Haku's technique. And he took full advantage of it. Although the ice mirrors boosted his speed, the technique did not augment his taijutsu well due to limitations in the technique. Because the ice mirrors work around the concept of reflection to boost speed, like a beam of light bounced between mirrors, the speed traveled between mirrors by the light remains constant as long as there was nothing in its path. However, once Haku makes contact with something or someone, like taijutsu required, that would stop his movement between mirrors, then his speed returns to normal until he gets back to a mirror. Because of this, Haku only attacked from mid-range distance using projectile weapons rather than taijutsu, without making contact with anything while midair. And while Haku's speed was boosted to incredible level that he could barely follow, the mirror's capabilities did not include the enhancement of his throwing power. And as such, the speed the masked ninja's thrown Senbon traveled at speeds only marginally quicker than when outside the mirrors. Even though he was barely keeping up with Haku's body, he was able to follow Haku enough to see the Senbon thrown at him. This allowed him to dodge and block Haku's attacks. It was here that his clones became useful. As without someone watching his back, Naruto would never be able to see the Senbon coming from behind. Not for the first time in his life, Naruto was thankful he had learned the Kage Bunshin. The blonde genin's body tensed, as he readied his arm for ultra-quick movements to block the multiple Senbon heading his way. But just as he was ready to act, his body suddenly froze. A sudden rush of information passed through his mind, letting him know that the Kage Bunshin he had left back at the house had dispersed after saving Tezuna's family from samurai. This only took a fraction of a second. But for Naruto, he had recovered a fraction of a second too late. And a pair of deep blue eyes widened as he watched the Senbon close in on him. Knowing he could neither dodge or block, Naruto flinched back fearfully on pure instinct. He managed to bring his arms up to shield his head and part of his upper body as best as he could. He grunted in pain as multiple Senbon embedded itself into his flesh. Several were lodged in his left arm and left thigh. A popping noise behind him let him know that his clone had also been destroyed. Phew! Naruto swore under his breath. He had been lucky to have escaped any hits to his vital areas. But because of the bad timing his clone at the house had chosen to disperse, he had to ultimately sacrifice the use of an arm and a leg temporarily. His entire left arm now hung limply beside him, having been hit in a spot, which temporarily disabled it. And he had lost all feeling in his left leg. It was taking all his willpower just to stay standing and not collapsing to his knees. As it was at the moment, both his left arm and leg was practically useless. In an instant, things had gone from bad to worse for the Konoha genins. Naruto, having knowledge in the field, knew that the disabling effects would not wear out for at least 10 to 20 minutes. The blonde cursed again. What bad timing for his clone to disperse. How was he supposed to last even 10 minutes now that he could not dodge or fight back? Naruto's breath quickened as his became more frantic by the second. Naruto quickly tried to regulate his breathing to calm his mind. While it did not erase his worries, it calmed him enough, allowing him to think properly once more, so he could devise a plan of action. Naruto. Sasuke called out in worry for his teammate, having escaped any serious injury himself. I'm alright, Naruto breathed to the Uchiha, trying to keep his teammate calm by not adding to his worry. Seeing their situation now, Naruto decided that they would have to change their tactics completely if they were to get out of the situation alive. Where before, they were aiming to tire Haku to give them a chance to counterattack, they no longer have the luxury of doing so. Screw trying to fight efficiently with chakra. They needed to attack. In this case, the best defense was offense. Now that he couldn't dodge attacks, he no longer had the option of staying on the defense and buy time. If he didn't attack now, he would only be target practice for their enemy. And in that case, he won't last even a minute. But without the use of one hand, the blonde knew he could not perform the seals for his Kaden, offensive jutsu. It was in situations like this that he really wished he knew beforehand how to do those one-handed seals that his current enemy had used. He resolved that he would learn it, if he got out of this alive. Fortunately for him, he had mastered several low-level jutsu to the point where he no longer needed to form the seals to execute the technique. Sasuke breathed a sigh of relief at Naruto's response, then jumped to the side, dodging Haku's next barrage of needles. Reacting quickly, as he realized he could see more than a faint blur, the dark-haired boy launched a fireball at the foe hunter Nin in retaliation. His timing was off slightly, as the fireball singed the tail end of Ninja's robes, but otherwise did no damage to their enemy. Haku moved to another mirror, this time behind Naruto. Naruto's danger senses let him know Senbon needles were heading his way. Unable to turn around or dodge to the side in his condition, Naruto formed a cage bunshin directly behind himself, using the clone as a human shield to take the blow for him. The clone dispersed, and the Senbon that was once lodged in flesh fell to the ground. Naruto breathed another sigh of relief. He didn't think he could create the clone fast enough. He was glad he had spent so much time mastering the technique. Not only did he no longer need to form the seals to create cage bunshin, the speed that he could form the clones was especially impressive. Thinking quickly, Naruto went through his list of techniques that he could use in this situation. Genjutsu. No, he didn't have anything useful for this situation. Neither could he form the seals for them in his current situation. What about taijutsu? Impossible. Even though he still have one arm, taijutsu was useless if he could not catch his enemy. But what of ninjutsu? He didn't really have anything useful in his ninjutsu list for this kind of situation. Cage bunshin was possible, but not effective for attacking in this situation. He would only be wasting chakra if he tried to rush at Haku and the mirrors with clones. Even Shunshin no Jutsu was useless, as it was a technique that temporarily boosts his reflex and speed to incredible levels by activating his entire body with chakra. It was not a teleportation jutsu despite the fact that it may look like it to civilians. Without the use of his leg, the speed-boosting element of the technique could not be utilized. The only ninjutsu he could even think of that could let him move around without using his own legs would be kawarimi. Naruto quickly brainstormed the possibilities of using kawarimi in his situation. There was one way he could do so that would simultaneously allow him to go on the offensive. But it would cost a lot of chakra. Still, it was his best shot to buy himself and Sasuke extra time. It was certainly better than standing around waiting to be hit. In any case, It was a better idea than rushing at the mirrors with a multitude of clones. Finally, having deciding on the course of action, Naruto leaned his weight into his right leg, then bending it at the knee. Pushing chakra into his usable leg, he jumped into the air. After launching himself into the air above Sasuke's head, Naruto twisted his body as best as he could without the aid of his left arm, causing his body to spin. In the process, 8 shuriken was thrown along with the spin in 8 different directions. Shuriken no Tatsumaki. 8 shuriken turned into 100, each heading for a different direction as they flew at the ice mirrors. Naruto landed hard on the ground on a single leg. The blonde's breathing became ragged due to expending so much chakra. But he admired his work slightly. It had been a move he created on the spot based on the Shuriken Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, which luckily he could also do without hand seals. It was incredibly draining, but he needed it for the next step of his plan. Haku easily deflected the shuriken flying at him with a throw of some Senbon, letting the rest of the shuriken hit, embedding into the ice mirrors. The shuriken Haku hit with Senbon dispersed into a cloud of smoke. The masked ninja stared at the blonde confusedly. The attack the blonde threw at him was more suited for use when alone and surrounded by multiple opponents. He had easily blocked the shuriken aimed at him, with the rest hitting his mirrors uselessly. Haku wondered what the blonde was planning to do. There was no way he would use a high chakra draining technique that was completely ineffective. So it must be part of some trick that the blonde was trying to pull. But before the hunter nin could further contemplate Naruto's actions, he found a fist in his face. The force of the punch was enough to send him to the concrete floor. Haku grunted from the pain of having been struck in the face, but recovered quickly enough to roll and dodge several shuriken thrown at him by Sasuke. Quickly using the momentum of his roll, Haku pushed himself into a crouching position and quickly sprung himself into another mirror. Again, Haku found himself copping another hard punch to the face, when he barely made it to the mirror. This time, however, he managed to see the attacker. Haku couldn't help but gasp in surprise behind his mask. The punch had been from the blonde rather than Sasuke, whom he thought it was. He had thought he had disabled the blonde, and had placed most of his focus on Sasuke instead, allowing him to be caught off guard. Haku recovered from the punch more quickly this time, and was back safely in another mirror before the 2 genins could attack again. Zabuza's accomplice winced slightly as the impact from the 2 punches gave him a slight headache. He tried to shake the pain away, only to make it worse. He stopped shaking and let the headache fade slowly by itself. Haku paused as his mask cracked, and then fell apart, finally revealing his effeminate face behind the intimidating mask. His thought raced. How did the blonde catch him at the speed he was moving? Judging by his movement earlier, he was almost 100% sure that his Senbon had disabled his arm and leg for a short while. In his condition, it was impossible for the blonde to catch him unless it was a jutsu of some kind. Naruto smirked slightly as he could see the puzzled expression on the fake hunter nin's face. His idea had worked better than he expected. By littering the entire area and each mirror with shuriken, he was able to use Kawarimi to replace himself with one of the many shuriken. As long as there was a shuriken where he wanted to go, he could do so, even without the use of one leg. Although if not for the fact that he had mastered Kawarimi without using hand seals, he would not be able to do this. And the speed that he could perform Kawarimi was exceptional, being almost on instinct. Sasuke looked at Naruto in a little surprise. Moments before, Naruto looked ready to collapse, and was using pure willpower to remain standing. How the hell did he hit Haku not once, but twice in this condition? All right, Sasuke, I'll draw his attention, you try to find any openings to attack. Naruto muttered his plan to Sasuke. Sasuke nodded and prepared himself. Meanwhile, Haku was still trying to catch his breath. Maintaining the Makio Hyosho was very draining. Not to mention he had already lost quite a bit of blood. His bleeding had slowed a bit before Naruto's attack, but was now once again bleeding profusely. Haku's eyes widened as he felt an elbow coming at his head from the left. He ducked under the arm and dived at another mirror. The moment he hit the mirror, he found himself having to twist his body to dodge a kick. Having avoided the kick by merely centimeters, the hunter nin moved to another mirror, then to another, this time not stopping so Naruto could not follow. Haku eventually stopped, his breathing much more raggedly than before. He winced as the maneuvering he had done to avoid the blonde's strikes aggravated the wound on his chest even further. Much of his robe from his chest down was now soaked in his blood, making it awfully uncomfortable as the fabric stuck to him like a second skin. The hunter nin forced the feelings of discomfort to the back of his mind and focused on analyzing what he had seen of the blonde's technique. From what he had seen, the strikes the genin had sent at him had been somewhat awkward. It was the kind of awkward movement that was expected from a person that couldn't use one side of his body for balance when trying to throw a punch or kick. And he could remember that strikes were made exclusively with the right arm and leg, despite it being obviously more convenient to use the left arm or leg in one case. This confirmed what he knew all along, that the blonde could not use his left arm and leg. But if that was the case, how did the blonde manage to attack him? Haku eventually realized that the blonde was trying to distract him from attacking his teammate, while the black-haired genin would look for weaknesses. Once having realized this, he dodged the next attack from Naruto and readied several senbon in his hand and threw them at Sasuke as he moved to another mirror. Sasuke's eyes widened, suddenly realizing that he could see Haku much more clearly than before. Pulling out a senbon that was lodged in his body, he used it to block a senbon, while jumping aside to dodge the rest. Having avoided the needles, Sasuke threw the senbon in his hand back directly at Haku in retaliation. Haku, although was able to easily block the senbon, was completely stunned. He could follow my movements exactly. Sasuke finally smirked, especially seeing the shocked look on Haku's face. I can see all of his movements. Unknown to Sasuke, his eyes had changed from the normal black to a deep red color and had a single black tomo. Haku watched the two genins warily, while trying to contain his ragged breathing to conceal his weakness from his enemy. His left hand was once again clutching his wound on his chest in pain. After the pain dulled slightly, he wiped the blood on his hand on a still clean section of his clothes. As the fake Kiri nin was staring at the two genins, his opponents stared back. Each side was analyzing the other. The fight is taking too long. Haku reprimanded himself for not being able to finish the fight quicker. Things weren't looking good for him. If he wasn't mistaken, then the raven-haired boy had awakened a bloodline ability during battle. It was the Sharingan Dujutsu, if his observations were correct. He needed to end the fight before the boy had the chance to adjust to his newly awakened Sharingan eyes. And he needed to figure out the blonde's technique before he regained the use of his temporarily disabled limbs. Gauging the situation carefully, Haku decided that the best way to find the blonde's weakness was to force one out of him by making the genin move. He launched a senbon at the blonde from the front, which Naruto was able to deflect with a kunai he held in his right hand. While Naruto was blocking the senbon, Haku had dived to another mirror and threw another senbon at the blonde's unprotected back. Instead of hitting Naruto, the senbon embedded itself into the floor. Haku's eyes widened once again as Naruto disappeared. The spot he once stood now lay a shuriken which turned to puff of smoke right before his eyes. Feeling a light breeze coming from the side, Haku leaned his head away from the source, dodging a punch from Naruto, as the spiky-haired boy once again suddenly appeared beside him. Pushing off the mirror, Haku sprung himself at another mirror. He was forced to bend his body in the air to dodge a massive fireball Sasuke had unleashed at him. Both sides once again stared down the other. All three of them were sweating heavily, and in Haku's case, his clothes were soaked thoroughly in both sweat and blood. It was no secret that both sides were tired, as all three were getting too fatigued to even bother trying to hide it. Despite the fact Haku had wanted to end the fight quickly, he found it to be impossible currently. He was tiring fast, and with the kunai wound, he could no longer move non-stop for long periods of time within these mirrors. The best he could do was to attack in a short but intense assault, then rest to catch his breath, so he could attack again. As much as he wanted to rush the fight, it would only tire him out quicker and before he could defeat the two genins if he did so. As he was resting, the fake Kiri-nin once again quickly analyzed the situation and what he had seen of Naruto's movements. He had partially figured out the blonde's technique. The clue lay in the fact that the moment the blonde dodged the Senbon he threw at him, a shuriken appeared where the blonde stood before. And Haku was entirely positive that the shuriken was not there before. Not to mention the shuriken burst into smoke immediately after. If his guess was right, then the blonde had used Kawarimi to replace himself with a shuriken in order to move around. That would also explain why the spiky-haired genin wasted so much chakra to form the shuriken clones for a wide area effect technique that was ineffective for that situation. Rather than the normal defensive usage of the replacement technique, where the user replaces themselves with an object to avoid attacks, the blonde had modified the technique for use in an offensive situation. Haku mentally applauded the boy for his ingenious use of such a basic technique. Not to mention the level of mastery needed to be able to use it like he does. Not only did the blonde replace himself with as small an object as a shuriken, he was capable of executing the jutsu without the need for hand seals. Although that wasn't surprising, as many high-level junins were also capable of such. But the speed in which the blonde could perform the basic ninja technique without seals surpassed even the most seasoned of ninja, even if he did discard the genjutsu portion that was used to deceive enemies in exchange for speed. However, Haku was fully aware of the flaws to this technique that he could exploit, in this circumstance. Firstly, the blonde was definitely slower than his speed within the mirrors even with this variation of Kawarimi. Naruto was only able to attack when he stopped moving between mirrors. Also, the blonde's eyes could barely keep up with him. That meant, if he kept moving without stopping, Naruto would not be able to come close to him, making the technique useless on the offense. Thus, placing the blonde back in a defensive situation to Haku's advantage. Secondly, it was obvious that the boy had yet to perfect the technique, as his reflex and response time was slow. The time it took for the spiky-haired genin to become aware of his position directly after using replacement was too long. Therefore, the recovery period between travel and attack was long enough for Haku to be able to avoid being hit, especially now that he had figured out the technique. If only the blonde had more practice, then this would be less of a problem. Thirdly, it was very chakra-consuming to constantly use it judging by the boy's labored breathing even if the jutsu was low level. After all, the massive amount of shuriken cage bunshin was the prerequisite to this technique. And that was very draining on his chakra. Lastly, the shuriken dispersed after Naruto replaced with it. After a while, the areas that have shuriken will start to decrease. And since the shuriken are still technically cage bunshin, Haku could easily destroy them with a single hit, rendering Naruto's technique practically useless without the shuriken. Deciding that it was the best course of action to take the blonde out of the fight first, Haku channeled some cold chakra using his Kekkei Genkai. He then moved to one of the lower ice mirrors and formed a jutsu once in position. Sensatsu Susho. Hundreds of ice needles formed in the air and flew at the two genins. Sasuke, now armed with the Sharingan, found the attack pathetically easy to avoid. Meanwhile, Naruto was able to use Kawarimi to get away. However, unsuspecting to the genins, Haku's plan was not to hit them with the ice needles. As the two dodged, the hundreds of ice needles struck the numerous ice mirrors behind them, dispersing every shuriken cage bunshin that was still lodged in those ice mirrors. Naruto frowned. He figured out my technique already. With almost half of his remaining shuriken cage bunshin dispersed by Haku, Naruto knew he could not let Haku destroy any more, or his new technique would be rendered useless. And he simply did not have enough chakra to reform them. Having come to this conclusion, Naruto attacked. Unfortunately, Haku had anticipated this reaction. This time returning the favor, Haku punched the genin in the face before Naruto's own blow landed, sending the blonde to the ground. Sasuke, seeing the fake hunter nin about to attack the downed Naruto, who was slow to get off the floor without the use of his arm and leg, quickly shot another fireball at Haku. Haku easily dodged the fireball with his superior speed and threw more Senbon towards the helpless Naruto. Sasuke jumped in path, in front of Naruto, and deflected the Senbon with discarded Senbon he had picked up in each hand. The raven-haired boy again retaliated with a Kaden Hosenka no Jutsu with multiple fireballs, each one getting closer and closer to their target, as Haku moved from mirror to dodge. After finishing the Kaden Jutsu, Sasuke panted a little from exertion. Despite the fact his eyes could now see and predict Haku's movements, his body could not keep up with that speed. The only way he could fight effectively was to attack from a range using projectiles. But he had already used up all of his kunai and shuriken earlier and has no time to retrieve them. The only thing he could do now was to use his Kaden ninjutsu and time his attacks right. After several more quick exchanges between Sasuke and Haku, Naruto had already stood back up. Both sides faced each other, now breathing even more heavily than before. Haku watched the two genins with blurred vision, as the blood loss was finally getting to him. Having used the Sensatsu Susho to destroy the blonde's shuriken cage bunshin, as he was down to his last, several needles had exhausted him even further. Things had not worked out as he had planned. He was supposed to have incapacitated the blonde, but the black-haired genin ruined his plan with his cursed eyes and was able to protect the blonde even when the opportunity to take him out presented itself. Though Haku attributed his failure partially to the fact that he had to watch his Senbon usage as his armament was low and could not throw them indiscriminately. And with the Sharingan, the boy's timing was perfect, placing even more pressure on him. If not for his skill and superior speed, he would already be toast. He already had several close calls. Meanwhile, the two genins kept their focused eyes on the enemy. They felt as if their lungs were burning from the lack of air. Sasuke's stamina was already wearing thin after his earlier injuries and having used Kaden Jutsu countless times. But beside the raven-haired boy, Naruto was slowly regaining feeling in his left limbs. It had not taken as long as the blonde had anticipated, though Naruto attributed it to his healing factor due to Kyuubi's influence. Lifting his right arm, the blonde wiped the sweat from his forehead with his sleeve to relieve himself of the tickling feeling when drops of sweat rolled down his face. It was irritating when that happened, especially when sweat entered his eyes. And he did not want that to distract him in a crucial moment. A couple of more minutes are all I need to regain enough use in my arm and leg. Naruto thought. Just as he was thinking that, the ice mirrors suddenly began to fade, and Haku dropped from a mirror to the ground below on his feet. Naruto smiled a little relieved. Oh good. He doesn't have enough chakra to maintain those mirrors anymore. But I barely have any chakra left myself, the blonde muttered under his breath, more to himself than to his teammate. Despite the size of his massive chakra reserves, the blonde ninja was practically drained of chakra after using shuriken cage bunshin as well as repeated use of kawarimi. I'm the same. Barely have enough for one more attack, Sasuke replied softly, though a little annoyed that he had used most of his chakra without landing a single hit. Even his Sharingan had deactivated to conserve energy. Then we'll have to make the next shot count, Naruto told Sasuke in a serious tone, who nodded in agreement. Both sides now stood facing the other, neither side seemingly wanting to attack first, now that they are out of the mirrors. Naruto frowned slightly as in his current exhausted condition, he was only capable of fighting with taijutsu at most. But his speed had been severely hampered as his limbs have yet to regain their full usage. He clenched his left hand as hard as he could to get more blood to flow through his arm, trying to hasten his recovery. He did the same for his left leg by tensing his thigh and calf muscles periodically. Naruto and Sasuke gave each other a look, which both members of Team 7 recognized what the other tried to say. They gave each other a nod, and attacked in perfect coordination. Rushing at their enemy side by side, they pressured Haku into another taijutsu fight. Naruto reached into his kunai pouch and clutched his last kunai in his hand as he ran. Moving as fast as his condition allowed, he threw the kunai at Zabuza's subordinate, causing the said ninja to dodge directly into the path where he was already in wait. With both sides exhausted and out of chakra, the Konoha ninjas held the advantage of outnumbering Haku 2-1. Eventually, with Sasuke's help, Naruto managed to land a blow to Haku's chest area. The hit, while light, brushed across Haku's kunai wound, making him cry out in pain. The pain was enough to make Haku lose focus momentarily, enough of a distraction for Naruto to sweep Haku's feet from under him. Naruto quickly jumped away under Sasuke's instruction, as the Uchiha had already prepared a fire jutsu, their last attack, which they hoped would finish the fight. Kaden. Gukaku no Jutsu. Sasuke cried out as the flames engulfed the body on the ground. Naruto and Sasuke both let out a loud sigh of relief at finally defeated the nin, believing that their enemy had been fried to a crisp by the Kaden Jutsu. But to their shock, Haku's form could be seen through the smoke. What he did was that the fake hunter nin had pushed his body to the limit, using the remainder of what little chakra he had left to form an ice barrier around himself to shield from the flames. Unfortunately, he didn't have enough chakra left to completely block out the flames. But it was enough to avoid instant death. Naruto and Sasuke each backed away in fear, both knowing that had been their last attack, neither in any condition to fight anymore, as they were now too drained to continue fighting. The smoke and steam dispersed, revealing a heavily injured Haku whom had numerous heavy burns all over his body courtesy of Sasuke's Gukaku no Jutsu. Though none of the burns were on his vital areas. The effeminate ninja now held a kunai in his hand, something he had picked up from the ground after being hit with the fireball. Haku struggled a bit to get from a crouch into a standing position, his legs wobbling and shaking uncontrollably. Only pure will kept his knees from buckling and causing him to collapse to the floor. Haku's gaze set on the black-haired Konoha ninja in front of him with tired, half-lidded eyes. His arm slowly rose into the air preparing to throw the kunai. Naruto's eyes widened in fear as his eyes darted from Haku to Sasuke and back. Sasuke's body was swaying from side to side, almost like he was drunk. Naruto swallowed nervously for his teammate. The boy looked ready to collapse. There was no way Sasuke could dodge the kunai. And unlike Senbon, a weapon with a low death rate, kunai could be fatal even if it did not hit the vital points. If the kunai hit Sasuke, Sasuke could die. Meanwhile, Haku was biting his lip in indecision, as he found himself hesitating. He already knew he would lose either way. He was exhausted and had already lost too much blood. He was going to die unless he received medical attention right away, while was most unlikely out here. He had just enough energy in his body to only be able to take out one of the two genins he was fighting. He really hated to take a life. But as his last duty as Zabuza's tool, he must remove the obstacles to Zabuza's goals. For Zabuza's sake, he would harden his own heart to kill one of the genins, no matter how much he would regret it. He had decided. To Naruto, everything seemed to move in slow motion. He could see that Sasuke wasn't even paying attention anymore as he was practically passed out while standing. He needed to stop Haku. But he could barely move anymore. And from where he was, he would not be able to intercept the kunai in time. There was only one thing he could do. Get to Haku before he could throw the kunai. From where he was standing, the distance to Haku was shorter than it would be to intercept the kunai. He didn't have enough chakra for ninjutsu, and had barely enough to stand. That left taijutsu is the only kind of attack he could use. But to stop Haku with a taijutsu strike, he needed to hit him hard enough to keep him down. In other words, a lethal blow. Could he bear it to kill someone? Was he willing to kill to save Sasuke? The answer was yes. Because he couldn't afford it to be otherwise. He would not let his teammate be killed. Biting down hard, Naruto forced his body to move with pure will. His muscles screamed in protest, and the strain caused some of his leg muscles to tear. But the pain had yet to even register, as his entirety of his focus was on stopping Haku. He moved. Then, silence. Did I make it? Was all Naruto could think. And the sound of a body collapsing to the ground could be heard. Naruto's breath caught in his throat at the sound of Sasuke collapsing behind him. Dread filled his mind. Then, it was followed by a loud clang of metal meeting concrete. Naruto's breath escaped his lips in a sigh of relief. The sound of metal against the concrete floor let him know the kunai had missed Sasuke, like he had fervently hoped. Sasuke most likely only collapsed due to exhaustion. Naruto's eyes refocused on his arm, trailing the limb outwards to his extended index finger. The single extended finger made contact with Haku's chest, just above the cut wound he had inflicted earlier in the fight. Haku looked down at where the finger met his body. His eyes were bulged out from the most intense pain he had ever felt in his life. Blood seeped from between his lips and dribbled down his chin like a red miniature waterfall. Slowly, Haku looked up, finally meeting the blue eyes of the blonde. The look in Haku's eyes made Naruto freeze. His eyes, so much like my own. It was the same look he had once held. The look that let him know that they were the same. That Haku had the look of one that was hated, alone, unwanted, unneeded. And it made Naruto feel all the more guilty. Haku knew that he was already dead. He had taken a direct hit to a major pressure point in his chest with enough force to heavily damage his internal organs. It wasn't enough to warrant instant death, but close enough. Naruto watched in shock as a serene expression eventually formed on the fake Kiri-nin's face. It was almost like the ninja finally felt free, like a burden lifted from his shoulders and that he felt content in death. The ninja's words were soft, but Naruto heard it as clear as day. "Thank you for stopping me from killing," Haku whispered to him. Naruto's eyes widened, completely speechless. "Sorry Zabuza-san, I can't protect you anymore," Haku whispered into the air, and closed his eyes for the last time. Naruto caught his body before it hit the ground and laid him down gently. Naruto dropped to his SS, finally unable to remain standing. He let out a shaky breath that he didn't realize he had been holding, before taking several deep breaths to calm his rapidly beating heart. It did not work. His heart was beating so fast it felt like it was going to jump out of his chest. And the heavy feeling in his stomach made him sick. And his throat felt constricting. Bile rose to his lips, and Naruto tried his best to keep it from escaping his lips. He couldn't help but take a look at the serene face on the boy he had just killed. The thought disgusted him, and one look was enough to send him over the edge, making him empty out the entire contents of his stomach onto the floor. Naruto slumped down, feeling slightly better, but not much. He turned his head to look at Sasuke, who lay on the ground face first, on his chest. As if feeling his stare, the raven-haired boy looked up and gave him a tired grin with half-lidded eyes. Naruto returned a somewhat strained smile, as he was still trying to get over the shock of taking his first life. As he sat there on the concrete floor, Haku's last words reverberated within his mind. "Thank you for stopping me from killing. I can't protect you anymore." Naruto looked down at his right hand, the hand that dealt the finishing blow that killed Haku. He clenched it into a fist, hard. Naruto didn't understand. Haku could have killed them both. There had been many chances throughout the entire fight. But Haku held back. Why? Haku did not want to kill, and in the end, his hesitation cost him his life. The thought that he took the life of the person that spared him his life made him feel even more disgusted with himself. He had been forced by circumstance to kill Haku. He even felt it somewhat justified that he was only protecting Sasuke. At least that was what he told himself. But it didn't really make him feel any better. And even though Haku had been his enemy, he did not deserve to die. A thought entered his mind. Was this what being a shinobi was truly about? Did being a true shinobi mean killing without regret, without emotion? Like Zabuza. But, even though Haku had been Zabuza's companion, he practically oozed kindness. He could sense his hesitation even at the end, when he had made the decision to kill Sasuke. Even in the last moments of his life, all he could say was being glad he did not have to kill. Naruto felt pity for the boy's life he took. Haku had given his life to protect Zabuza even though the man didn't even deserve such loyalty. But there was no doubt that Haku was strong. He had certainly earned his respect. Things were starting to make sense. Things the Sandaime had been telling him all his life, as well as Iruka-sensei. I think I finally understand what it means to be strong, Naruto whispered to himself while staring at Haku's face. Naruto promised himself right then and there that in honor of Haku's memory, he would protect his own precious people. Sandaime, Iruka-sensei, Kurenai-sensei, Anko-chan, Kakashi-sensei, Sakura and even Sasuke. And he would protect everyone in his village. Because he too wanted to be strong. As both Naruto and Sasuke were resting on the ground, loud chirping noises suddenly came through the mist. It was almost like the sound of 1,000 birds chirping at the same time. Naruto and Sasuke both lifted their heads and turned to the direction of the noise. They turned just in time to see Kakashi drive a crackling ball of chakra into Zabuza's chest, instantly killing the man. Kakashi pulled his fist out of Zabuza's bloodied chest and let the dead ninja's body fall to the ground with a thump. Kakashi sighed tiredly, but relieved at finally having finished their enemy off. He had already used almost all of his chakra to defeat Zabuza. And rest sounded awesome at the moment. But a sudden curt laugh attracted their attention, placing the entire team once more on edge. They whipped their heads towards the direction of the voice and found a large mob of samurai and criminals led by a short man that wore a business suit and glasses. Kakashi slowly made his way to Naruto and Sasuke's position, as they were closer to the mob. Sasuke, despite being dead tired, pushed himself off the ground to a stand from his prone position. Oh, how disappointing, Zabuza. It's good that you're dead. I never intended to pay you anyways, the short man at the front mocked whilst looking at Zabuza's dead body not far behind them. The midget then looked at Team 7. Ha ha, you guys just saved me a lot of trouble and money, Gato said smugly. We'll just have thank you, by killing you. Naruto's expression instantly darkened. His teeth grinded against each other, and his hands were clenched into fists so tightly that his nails dug into his palms hard enough to draw blood. Even his entire body was shaking in pure rage. Kakashi was the first to notice the blonde's anger, but did nothing, as he too was very feeling angry with Gato. He was just better at hiding it than the blonde. Though he kept his eyes on the boy to make sure he would not do anything rash. But Naruto was beyond pissed off. It was beyond simple anger, and almost bordered on hate. Naruto tried to rein in his anger, but his efforts proved futile. It was all for nothing, he thought sadly, which turned into more anger. He had killed someone that didn't deserve to die. And it was all for nothing. Then, as if a dam breaking, his mind became flooded with pure hatred. All he knew was that man, Gato, would pay. And he'd make sure of it. Kakashi and Sasuke's eyes widened and backed away as the killing intent that leaked out from the angry blonde was beginning to suffocate them. The crowd relished in their fear, thinking the ninja were afraid of them, as they were less sensitive to killing intent than ninjas to be affected. But as much as Sasuke and Kakashi were wary of the mob, they were more so of Naruto. What incredible killing intent, Kakashi thought. Is the seal breaking? No. Some chakra is leaking through, but... Naruto bent down into a crouch and picked up a kunai that lay on the ground in front of him. He slowly stood back up, but his back was hunched slightly. It was almost as if he could go berserk and charge the crowd any second. Naruto turned his head to Kakashi, who backed up further in fear at the look on the blonde's face. Instead of the normal brilliant blue eyes that he had expected to see, they were now replaced by a pair of slitted deep red eyes that showed pure malice. His whisker marks had also thickened and darkened, making the boy look animalistic. Naruto let out a small snarl, baring his fangs, causing Kakashi to take another step backwards. Naruto was obviously under the influence of the Kyuubi. And he wasn't completely sure Naruto could determine friend from foe in this state. To Kakashi's relief, Naruto's attention focused back to Gato and the crowd. The look of rage intensified as his gaze focused on the short man in the front. His eyes narrowed, making them seem even more demonic looking. Then all of a sudden, he disappeared from sight. Fast, Kakashi thought, a little shaken as he was the only one capable of following his movements, and even then, Naruto was not much more than a blur. Though he had his Sharingan eye already covered to conserve chakra. Sasuke on the other hand was completely unable to see Naruto having also deactivated his Sharingan. Naruto reappeared in front of Gato. The kunai in his hands was already embedded into Gato's heart before anyone realized what had happened, killing the midget instantly. Naruto stayed completely still with his head down, his bangs covering his eyes. His hand was still gripping tightly on the handle of the kunai that was lodged in Gato's heart. His hold on the blade was all that was keeping Gato's body upright. All present held in a breath of air, being completely still. Silence ensued, as the mob was too scared from the display to say or do anything lest they invoke the blonde's wrath. Even though everyone was still, blood flowed from the wound, creating a large red patch of cloth on the business suit Gato wore. The blonde slowly pulled the blade back, and the body of the crime boss fell to the ground with a thump, making some of the closer crooks jump slightly in fright. The Kyuubi container slowly lifted his head, finally revealing his dark red, demonic eyes from behind his hair. The few men close by that could see the boy clearly stumbled backwards in fear. The pure malice and hate within those eyes were downright frightening. And the way the boy looked at them was almost like the eyes of a predator watching its prey. The killing intent that they could barely sense earlier was now suffocating, now that Naruto was close. Then, as the crooks were beginning to think they were going to die, the blonde disappeared once again, reappearing between Sasuke and Kakashi. Blood slowly dripped from the tip of Naruto's blade and onto the floor. Eventually, he lost his grip on the handle of the kunai, letting it fall to the floor. Several loud clangs could be heard, before the blade finally stopped bouncing. The intimidating red eyes faded back to the usual blue. And the intent to kill faded, as the object of his rage had already been eliminated. Naruto dropped to one knee, too tired to even stand. The sudden rush of Kyuubi's chakra had energized him for a brief moment. But now that it was gone, he felt even worse than before. Kakashi breathed a sigh of relief as Kyuubi's influence on Naruto receded. While he could sense that the seal was not close to breaking, Naruto being influenced by Kyuubi was never a good thing. Though the scary part was that he couldn't distinguish which part of the killing intent originated from Kyuubi and which part from Naruto himself. Seeing the boy too exhausted to even stand, Gato's men quickly regained their confidence. Damn ninja, you just killed our source of money. Now we'll have to attack the town and take all the valuables. One man announced. The rest of the mob cheered in agreement. Is there anything you could do to get rid of them, sensei? A jutsu or something? Naruto questioned, hoping his sensei would answer yes. No, I've used up too much chakra, Kakashi replied, to his disappointment. Let's go, one of the leading crooks yelled. And together, the group of criminals charged towards them. Naruto watched the mob wearily with half-lidded eyes as they moved towards them. He tried to will his body to move, to prepare himself to fight. But his body would not respond. Even his vision was blurry. He was in no condition to fight. The only one even capable of fighting now was Sakura. And at her skill level, Sakura would never be able to fight all of the samurai and criminals at the same time. But before the mob could get within 20 meters of them, an arrow fell out of the sky in between Team 7 and Gato's mob, effectively stopping the charge. Naruto's eyes opened wide, and the team whipped their head around, to find a massive crowd of Wave Country civilians that had armed themselves with anything they could find. Picks and shovels were common among them. Even though they were untrained and improperly armed, they easily outnumbered Gatos' men 5-1. Anyone who moves any closer to this island will die facing the entire force of this island. A civilian man leading the crowd called out. In unison, the entire crowd of villagers brandished their weapons and roared in agreement. Inari. Naruto called out in relief at seeing the boy at the front of the crowd. The hero always comes at the right time, right? The boy called out from the front of the crowd with a grin. The 8-year-old was wearing a helmet and holding a crossbow in his hands, looking ready to fight. Naruto smiled proudly at the boy. Now knowing that his team was saved, Naruto finally let go and succumbed to unconsciousness. His half-lidded eyes slowly trailed the form of his teacher. 2 orbs of crystal blue shifted and tumbled, eventually settling onto a grayish white-haired man. His mind was working sluggishly in his tired state, taking twice as long to decipher the gesture of his instructor as a simple wave of goodbye, ending yet another day of mission work. The blonde ignored it, too tired to make any semblance of a response. Even as Sasuke left for home, he stood unmoving like a training dummy, stiff and completely unresponsive. It had been weeks since that day, yet his memories were as fresh as the day it happened. His nights since then had been plagued constantly by visions of the dead. When he slept, as soon as his mind crosses the boundaries of consciousness into sleep, his subconscious mind would be bombarded endlessly with images of a dying Haku. His face bloodied from the blood that flowed from his lips, and the terrifyingly dull eyes as he lay dying. He had the look of someone thoroughly defeated, but was perfectly at ease and content with the approaching death, as though it brought him comfort by finally releasing his from a lifetime of torment and pain. Even in a dream, the image of Haku's face was frighteningly vivid. And when he stared into those lifeless eyes, he would find himself jolted awake suddenly, soaked in cold sweat once again, only to find that he had dozed off for no more than a few moments. The lingering guilt of his first kill was causing him a lack of sleep, and was taking its toll on him mentally and physically. More than once, Naruto wondered whether Haku's spirit was seeking vengeance even in death, by not allowing him any rest. The blonde sighed finally, and shook himself out of these absurd thoughts. Each night, he would only get just barely enough sleep to scrape through the next day. He was still capable of performing his duties as a ninja, but he no longer had the energy he usually held, and to others, he passed off as unusually quiet and distant. Kakashi had been concerned for his mental health, having made his first kill. The Junin even tried to remove him from active duty for some time to recover, though he refused adamantly, not wanting to show any weakness to his teammates, especially Sasuke. Kakashi eventually relented, as he proved capable still, in completing his duties. But it seemed that he really should have taken time off, as he was starting to hallucinate in his tired state due to a lack of sleep. It was making him see square rocks and in the middle of the road. He blinked and shook his head a little, trying to shake away the hallucination. Naruto blinked again. It was still there. He squinted his eyes at the rock, taking a closer look. Wait a minute, square rock. The blonde frowned and his eyes began to twitch. He wasn't hallucinating at all. It was only someone using a ninja technique to make themselves seem inconspicuous, and doing a really poor job of it. And he thought he had been seeing things. Only a poorly trained person could butcher such a low-level ninja technique. Even he had a solid grasp of this technique despite his lack of skill in the basic ninja techniques when compared to others. And he knew just the person. Konohamaru, a square rock with 2 holes like that does not exist. It's so obvious, he spoke exasperatedly, rolling his eyes as he spoke. I should have expected that from my rival, a childlike voice exclaimed from within the rock-textured box. Then, the square box glowed brightly, making Naruto back away slightly. As the brightness reached its peak, it exploded, enshrouding it in a dense cloud of smoke. Coughing noises could be heard from within the smoke, making Naruto sigh even further in exasperation. As the gaseous substance slowly dispersed, 3 tiny figures revealed themselves from within. Hey, you used too much gunpowder. Konohamaru complained loudly. The 3 then realized that their presence had been revealed and turned awkwardly to the blonde who was staring back with a deadpan look. Quickly jumping into a pose, the 3 introduced themselves in a way they thought cool. The one who possesses the sex appeal of an adult, and the female ninja from the senior group, Moegi. A small red-headed girl exclaimed. The one who loves dividing numbers, Udon. A dark-haired boy sporting a pair of glasses cried out half-heartedly, as he got into an equally silly pose of his own. The village's #1 genius ninja, Konohamaru. The final figure, Konohamaru boasted. The 3 of us make the Konohamaru core. The 3 called out in unison. As much as he loved theatrics and flashy entrances, Naruto couldn't help but groan at the display that was totally lame. The sheer level of absurdness of those poses made him want to slam his head against a wall. Just like I thought. It's just you 3. It's just you 3. You've been treating us so cold lately, Konohamaru pouted. And, what do you want? The blonde said exasperatedly, while rolling his eyes. See, he's so cold. Konohamaru whispered to Udon. Well, leader, do you have time right now? Moegi asked, breaking out the puppy eyes. He scratched the back of his head slightly, finding it difficult to refuse the girl's cute puppy-eyed look, yet not quite in the mood for playing games. I was going to train, he said in an apologetic tone, not wanting to seem too harsh in turning the kids down. But you said that you would play ninja with us. Konohamaru whined, greatly disappointed at the blonde's response. The spiky-haired blonde rubbed his hair sheepishly. Really? What's the point in ninja playing ninja? A voice interjected from the side. A little surprised at the extra presence, Naruto looked to the side to see Sakura looking back at him in a little amusement. He had forgotten about her, expecting her to have already left with Sasuke like she usually did. What he didn't know was that the pink-haired girl had been worried about him, as he had not been acting like his usual self, and Sakura felt that it was her responsibility as his teammate to ensure his well-being. She hadn't caught the usually cheerful boy smiling even once since the fight in Wave Country. A depressing atmosphere now replaced the cheery optimism that he held, and she found it was causing her to also feel slightly depressed. Naruto's cheerful nature had always brought her a warm feeling. Now that it was gone, she felt somewhat empty inside. She hadn't known before how much she would miss his cheerfulness and energy, until now that it was gone. But she knew that she wanted it back. Ni-chan, who's this girl? Konohamaru looked at Sakura, before smirking a sly grin at Naruto, and patted his rival on the back as if congratulating him for something. You're better than I thought, Konohamaru exclaimed, the smirk still in place. She's your right, Konohamaru said, while sticking his pinky out to indicate what he was implying in place of the word he left unsaid. Sakura glared threateningly at Naruto as if daring him to agree. Naruto, noticing the look on the girl's face, sweat dropped and quickly denied it, unwilling to invoke the terrifying girl's wrath. Actually, she's just my teammate. Though it had been what she had wanted to hear, Sakura felt oddly disappointed by his answer. Well, I suppose you could do better than someone with that big a forehead, Konohamaru quipped, rubbing his chin in contemplation as he took a better look of the pink-haired girl. The blonde winced as he caught the dark look that appeared on the said pink-haired girl's face. The murderous intent in her expression was almost demonic, and Naruto found himself frozen to the spot. You should start running, Konohamaru, Naruto advised in a whisper. The boy gulped loudly, realizing his mistake, took the advice, and quickly fled for his life as fast as his legs could take him. As she gave chase, Sakura turned to look over her shoulder. Catching the small, amused smile that the blonde sported, she felt a little relieved. He was smiling again, and she felt the warmth in her chest return. The sound of impact around the corner caught his immediate attention. It had originated from the direction in which Sakura and Konohamaru had disappeared to, around the corner of the street out of his view. The subsequent sounds of struggle put him further on edge. That hurt. A boy dressed entirely in black clothes and hood spat, hoisting Konohamaru up by the front of his shirt. Stop it. We're going to get scolded later, a blonde kunoichi beside him reprimanded, though made no movement to stop him. Naruto cautiously approached as he took the time to observe the two. Judging by their hitai, they were clearly ninja from Sunagaku. The kunoichi looked to be a few years older than he, and had a head of blonde hair held in 4 ponytails. She was quite beautiful and her exotic looks stood out clearly among the local girls of Konoha. The male Suna ninja wore a completely black outfit and hood, and could be identified from the crowd by the distinctive purple and white face paint he wore, though in Naruto's opinion, it made him look a bit ridiculous. Both ninja had large weapons strapped behind them, though Naruto couldn't quite make out what they were from his point of view. Please let him go, Naruto said, as he walked up beside Sakura who had also approached the foreign ninja. He was polite, yet his tone was firm, though not demanding. It was almost emotionless, and unnervingly calm tone of voice, a type of speech that he picked up from Kurenai, as the kunoichi often spoke in such a tone to not reveal any information about oneself through their speech. Until he had an idea of the two Suna ninjas' skill and was confident that he could defeat them, it was wise to avoid a fight if possible. Being a specialist in espionage and tracking, avoiding direct combat at all cost was something Kurenai had drilled into his mind. While it hadn't been something he liked to learn, Naruto knew that learning to control his emotions would only serve to make him a better ninja in the long run. Though avoiding conflict had been a sound decision, Naruto knew that while being polite in this situation was imperative, being too passive would only be counterproductive as the Suna ninja would take it as a sign of cowardice. These guys are Konoha genin, the hooded man grinned as if he was a child just given a new set of toys. I just wanted to play around a bit, he said, sporting an arrogant smirk. Despite his improvements in controlling his emotions, Naruto struggled to suppress his anger and irritation. Quickly calming himself, Naruto decided that the hooded guy was underestimating him. If being polite did not work, then the only way for him to get the guy to back down was to show some of his power. In other words, he needed to show off a little. Something that he had no qualms in doing. In fact, he would take pleasure in doing so. Though this would also risk further conflict. Grinning inwardly, while stepping forward with an impassive look, he stared into the other boy's eyes. You should let go of the Hokage's grandson. Or there will be consequences, a voice whispered from directly behind the two Sand Genin. The Sand Genin quickly whirled around completely startled at the voice that whispered into their ears behind them to see another Naruto looking at them impassively. The male Suna Genin dropped Konohamaru in complete surprise, who scurried on his hands and feet quickly, seeking safety behind Naruto. Sakura and the 3 kids gaped at Naruto in awe. Since when was Naruto so cool? Sakura thought. Sure, he was undoubtedly much more attractive than he used to be, but what he had just done had been a level of cool that she had always attributed to Sasuke, and not something she had suspected Naruto was capable of. Now wearing a serious look on his face, the Sand Genin reached for the strap on his shoulder, ready to unleash his weapon. Hey, you're going to use Karasu? The Sand Kunoichi asked, surprised and anxious that this would lead to much trouble for them. Kankuro, stop, a new, cold and emotionless voice interjected from above. Naruto frowned slightly as he turned to look at the new arrival that was standing upside down on a branch in a nearby tree. His eyes passed over the redhead and he quickly analyzed boy. He was short, though his exact height was hard to judge given that he was hanging upside down in the air. The boy had a cold expressionless face and dark rings around the eyes. Naruto had no doubt that this new presence was strong. He had not sensed him even when he was so close. The redhead had a level of stealth comparable to even Kakashi. He's good. Really good, Naruto thought, a little worried that he may have to fight someone of this caliber if they cannot resolve this issue peacefully. You're a disgrace to our village, The redhead spoke coldly to the hooded boy. Kankuro laughed nervously at the sight of the new boy. Gee Gaara, what do you think we came to the Leaf Village to do? Gaara reprimanded. Listen Gaara, these guys started it, and, Kankuro stuttered out nervously. Shut up, or I'll kill you, Gaara threatened. I got it. My mistake. I'm sorry, really sorry. Kankuro waved his hand in front of him desperately to placate the redhead, seemingly extremely frightened of him. Gaara then turned to Naruto. Apologies to you guys. He has strange eyes. Naruto thought. And as far as I can tell, this Kankuro guy isn't weak. For him to be this scared of the redhead, he's got to be really strong. Unknown to him, Gaara was also analyzing him. To be able to catch Kankuro off guard so easily. He's good. Using a swirl of sand to cover his movements, Gaara appeared beside the two previous sand ninja. Let's go. We didn't come here to play around, Gaara ordered to the two other sand ninja. As the sand genin turned to leave, Sakura rushed forward. Wait. The pink-haired girl called out. What? The sand kunoichi questioned without turning around. Judging from your Hitai 8, you guys are ninja from the hidden sand village, right? The fire country and wind country may be allies, but it's forbidden for ninja to enter each other's villages without permission. State your purpose. Depending on. The sand kunoichi interrupted her. Talk about living under a rock. Don't you know anything? Here's my passport. The kunoichi lifted a pass with her picture and details on it. We're genin of the hidden sand from wind country. We've come to your village to take the Chunin selection exam, the blonde kunoichi stated. Naruto stepped forward. What are your names? He wanted to learn as much of these ninja as he could in case his team gets nominated for the exams. It never hurt to have some information about your competition. The sand kunoichi pointed to herself questioningly. Me. Naruto nodded while giving the beautiful sand kunoichi a wink, making the girl blush. Yes. You and your teammates. Sakura frowned a bit, slightly angry at the sight of Naruto flirting with the beautiful foreign kunoichi. He shouldn't be flirting with that foreign hussy. He should be flirting with me Shanaru. Her inner personality screamed. Sabaku no Gaara. I'm also interested in you. Your name. Gaara cut in, before the kunoichi could speak. Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto answered Gaara, then turning to the kunoichi and gave her an expectant smile. Sabaku no Tamari, and that's Kankuro, Tamari answered, still blushing lightly, while pointing at the hooded guy. After making their introductions, the sand genin walked away. Naruto stared at their backs as they left, and a thoughtful expression appeared on his face as they disappeared around a corner. Interesting. In a large room, 20 or so ninja was gathered before the Hokage. There were shinobi with a wide range of duties ranging from the protection of the village, to academy instructors to Junin team leaders. From the people here, you should already know the reason for this meeting, Sarutobi began. So, it's that time of year already. Kakashi commented. I've already seen a few in this village, Asuma asked with a cigarette hanging from his mouth. So, when is it? Kurenai asked, masking her excitement and eagerness to have her team prove themselves in the Chunin exams with an impassive tone. She had trained her team especially hard just for this moment. 1 week from now, Sarutobi answered. Kakashi raised his eyebrow at the revelation. That's sudden, the white-haired Junin admitted. Sarutobi took the pipe from his lips and blew out a puff of smoke. I will now make the official announcement. 7 days from now, the 1st of July, we will begin the Chunin selection exam, the leader of the Leaf Village announced. Now, those watching over the new genin step forward. Kakashi, Kurenai, and Asuma. Are there any genin you would like to nominate for this exam? Sarutobi said. Among the gathered ninja, Yumino Iruka frowned. He doesn't need to ask. They aren't ready, the academy teacher thought, already expecting none of the teams to be nominated. Now, starting with Kakashi, Sarutobi continued. Team 7, Uchiha Sasuke, Uzumaki Naruto, Haruno Sakura, under the name of Hitaki Kakashi. I nominate these three to take the Chunin selection exam, Kakashi announced. Iruka gasped in shock at the Junin's announcement. Team 8 consisting of Hyuga Hinata, Inuzuka Kiba, Aburame Shino. I, Yuahi Kurenai, nominate Team 8 for the Chunin exam, Kurenai announced with confidence. I, Sarutobi Asuma, leader of Team 10, consisting of Yamanaka Ino, Nara Shikamaru, Akamichi Choji. I nominate these three for the exam. Surprised gasps were heard from most of the gathered ninja, and whispers of the sudden revelation began to pass between the gathered ninja. All three teams nominated. All of the rookies in the Chunin exam. Hold on a second. Iruka cried out to the Hokage in protest. What is it, Iruka? Sarutobi questioned. Hokage-sama, please let me have a word. I may be speaking out of place, but these were students of mine at the academy. They are all very talented, but it's too early for them to take the exam. They should have more experience before being nominated. Iruka cried out in concern. I became a Chunin when I was 6 years younger than Naruto, Kakashi challenged, knowing how much Iruka cared for Naruto. Naruto is different than you. Are you trying to crush these kids? Iruka retorted. They are always complaining about the missions. Experiencing some pain may be good for them. What? Iruka frowned. I understand what you're trying to say. But your concern is unfounded. Naruto is perhaps the most ready out of them all, at least mentally. Along with Sasuke, the two of them were able to defeat a Junin-level ninja together in a C-ranked turned A-ranked mission. Naruto also made his first kill in that mission, Kakashi revealed. Iruka's eyes widened at the revelation. He had heard of the mission, but he wasn't aware of the details, as he had not been the one to review the mission report, and had yet to hear anything from Naruto himself. He had expected an elite Junin like Kakashi to deal with all the combat situations they came across. Iruka found himself speechless and unable to respond. Kurenai was also immensely surprised, and would have let out a gasp of shock involuntarily, if not for her good self-control. She hadn't seen the blonde-haired Jinchuriki since he left for the mission to Nami no Kuni over a month ago. Even when she knew he had returned, the blonde kept skipping their usual scheduled training sessions together, only leaving her a note each time to say he would not be coming. The red-eyed woman had been irritated to say the least, and had been planning on giving him a piece of her mind for slacking off and wasting her time. But now, that irritation turned to worry for the boy. The memory of her own first kill was still as fresh on her mind as the day it happened, even after many years had passed. She had been young then, as young as Naruto was now. She had taken weeks off active duty to recover. And it was only with the support of her teammates and sensei that she slowly got over it. Maybe I should check up on him, she thought. It was late in the evening when the meeting had ended. While the central business district of Konoha was still bursting with nightly activity, the quieter streets were already deserted, as most citizens had returned home. Unlike the majority of shinobi that had left the meeting exhausted and wanting to wind down with a few drinks at the pubs, Kurenai had no desire to do so this night. She wasn't a big drinker like many of the shinobi that liked to wash away their troubles and painful memories with large amounts of alcohol. Though from time to time, she would share sake among friends and socialize with her fellow ninja. Most of the time, she did so to keep up with the latest rumors and news pertaining to the ninja world, both in and outside the village. Information gathering was an essential skill for a shinobi, and most people are at their most talkative when they're sloshed. It was surprising how many ninja liked to talk of their exploits and experiences on missions over some sake. And Kurenai felt that any information she learned at these times could potentially be useful for her career as a ninja. One would never know, as that gossip could end up saving her life one day. But tonight was not such a night, as she was already mentally exhausted after a lengthy meeting. She had still planned to organize some last-minute training for her team to prepare for the Chunin exams. She absent-mindedly declined an invitation from Asuma to go to the nearest pub, to his disappointment, and headed towards the more busy streets of Konoha looking for a bite to eat before she embarrassed herself in front of fellow shinobi with the rumbling of her stomach. Kurenai was glad she had the foresight to eat something before the meeting, although it hadn't been more than a stick of dango, in her rush to get to the meeting. Being a seasoned ninja, she was no stranger to working on an empty stomach for extended periods of time, though it wasn't exactly a good feeling having hydrochloric acid burning at your stomach walls. Looking left and right as she traveled down the streets, passing by several restaurants, trying to make up her mind on the type of cuisine she wanted to sat her hunger with. Her red eyes eventually settled onto a small ramen stand that stood just outside of the busiest parts of the street. She smiled slightly. Ichiraku ramen didn't sound bad at the moment. Kurenai had been to the Ichiraku ramen stand several times with Naruto and Anko. The ramen was good in her opinion, more than good enough to be deserving of the title of the best ramen one could find in Konoha, which Naruto praised as the self-appointed greatest fan of ramen. She wasn't nearly as enthusiastic as Naruto was in ramen, though she found the blonde's obsession to be slightly contagious and developed a small appreciation of it. Thinking about the boy's eagerness in eating ramen always brought a smile to her lips. Even though she had not seen the boy for just over a month, she found herself starting to miss his company. The reason she enjoyed his company wasn't because she had romantic feelings for the boy, despite how much Anko liked to joke about it. It was because of the energy that he brought to her monotonous life. Even Anko had often commented on how dull she was at times and that she was way too serious about her job as a ninja, that she was a borderline workaholic. Kurenai entered the stand, and exchanged an awkward glance with Ayame, before ordering a bowl of ramen. As she waited, the image of an impatient Naruto fidgeting heavy as he waited for his ramen passed through her mind. But thoughts on the boy only served to make her worry. She wanted to know how he was coping with having his first kill. She eventually decided to hurry with her eating and check up on the boy after she was done. She knew that she wouldn't have any time in the next several days to visit him, as she had to prepare her team for the exams. Wincing from pain, he jerked backwards in natural reflex, as a kunai skimmed his arm, cutting it. Ignoring the bleeding, he jumped backwards, dodging another blade, by barely an inch. His body was tired, almost on the verge of collapse. And his legs wobbled unstably like jelly, not knowing when it would finally give way to gravity. But he pushed on with sheer will. He quickly tensed his legs, locking his muscles to control the shaking, before having to dive to the side as a moderate-sized fireball roared past him, incinerating all in its path, before dispersing into smoke. He panted heavily in exertion, and the lingering heat from the fire did nothing to help, as it made it difficult to breathe. As he struggled to regain his breath, his eyes worked in a frenzy, trying to track every movement of his enemy. There were 6 of them, their features undiscernible in the dark. For the next few seconds, they did not attack, allowing him enough time to calm and regulate his breathing. But they had taken that time to surround him, each taking an advantageous position for both offensive and defensive strategies. His eyes narrowed. 6 against 1 were not good odds for him at all. Every move he made now would be crucial. Any wasted movements on his part will lead to immediate defeat. He could not afford to make even a single mistake. The only way he could win was to be something he wasn't. He needed to fight in a way his enemies aren't. He needed to be efficient. Every movement he made, every step he took, every punch, kick, block or parry he made must be calculated down to the last degree. But more importantly, he must be ruthless in attack. Every blow must be simple and quick, and executed without any hesitation, and delivered without mercy. When striking out, there can only be one goal in mind. And that was to kill. And to kill immediately. A single strike to the throat or to the heart is all that will suffice. He had never fought like that before. Never as ruthless, never as brutal. Never aiming to kill. Except that one time. Now breathing evenly, he extended his senses outwards, preparing to defend himself against the hidden enemy. Suddenly, something prickled his danger instincts, and he dove to the side urgently. Several thumping noises were heard, as three kunai embedded itself into the dirt ground where he had been standing. His eyes widened in horror, when he caught sight of several small paper tags tied to the ends of the kunai. He jumped. Not quick enough. He grunted in pain, as he was thrown roughly against a tree. Coughing out some blood, he slumped tiredly and in pain against the tree. Using the tree behind him as leverage, he shakily hoisted himself upwards, holding onto the tree to maintain balance. Turning around, he headed into the forest, hoping to hide himself within the darkness of the night and the shadows within the trees. But the enemy had already anticipated that action, as if their actions were extensions of his own mind. With his escape route cut off, he headed back into the safety of the clearing. The option of hiding was no longer available. They were aware of every tactical decision he made, and countered each and every one of them. If he could not hide in the darkness, there was no point in staying within the darkness of the forest. Barely any moonlight penetrated the canopy of the trees, certainly not enough for him to fight effectively. He barely deflected a thrown kunai with one of his own, lucky that he had been at the edge of the forest where moonlight reflected off the steel blade, allowing him to see the incoming weapon. Standing at the center of the clearing once again, he waited, the initiative in the enemy's hands. It was late at night, but under the bright moonlight, he could see everything and anything the enemy could throw at him. Even though they surrounded him, several hiding in the surrounding trees, he would be able to handle any projectile weapons much easier from his current position, which would force the enemy into close combat. Precisely what he wanted. Hearing the rustling of grass from behind, the sign of fast-paced movement, he reacted on his fighting instincts and ducked under a kick sent from behind. Sliding out of the way, so he faced his enemy, he found himself assaulted from behind by another opponent. He blocked the kick with his right arm, grunting slightly in pain as he took the full brunt of the impact with the limb. Pushing downwards in a single sweep of his arms, he redirected the leg to the side, causing the enemy to slightly lose balance. He did not have the chance to counter-attack, as he was forced to add some distance between them, by the first attacker. Before he could gain a stable stance, he barely managed to sidestep yet another fireball from a third enemy. This time, the flames managed to singe parts of his clothes. And he winced as the heat of the fire scorched his skin just from proximity. Then, a flare of chakra alerted him to the presence above. He looked upwards, finding another attacker barreling upon him. He sent himself into a tumble to move out of harm's way, managing to escape a direct hit, which made impact with the ground. But the subsequent explosion of rubble caught him off guard, sending him flying back 10 feet and painfully onto his back. Brushing away the chunks of dirt on his chest, he lifted his bruised and battered body off the ground painfully. He snarled angrily at being beaten so easily. He clenched his fist hard. If he was going to lose, he would at least do some damage. He let out a loud war cry, and charged the nearest enemy, the one that attacked from above, putting his all into one single attack. The enemy stood wide-eyed, frozen to the spot, not expecting him to go on the attack, nor for him to be able to move at that speed. He moved, as fast as he could, the remaining of his energy forced into his legs to generate more speed. His arm reached out, hands already formed into a claw. His full concentration was aimed at the throat. To win, he must come at them with intent to kill. He neared his enemy, 2 feet, 1 feet, half feet. Just before contact, a pale face flashed through his mind. And blood, Haku. He flinched. It was all it took for the situation to be reversed. And he found air forcefully expelled from his lungs before he landed roughly onto the ground. He laid there on the ground, thoroughly defeated. Pushing himself into an upright, sitting position to get more air back into his lungs, he then coughed out some blood. 6 figures surrounded him, looking down upon him, no longer hidden among the trees. He held out a hand, a sign of surrender. The figures nodded and disappeared in puffs of smoke. He sat there alone, breathing raggedly. Even when I'm awake, it still affects me, he whispered to himself. Completely exhausted, He collapsed onto his back, resting his aching body. The scene that greeted her wasn't one Kurenai had been expecting. It was already deep into the night when she reached the training grounds, a time where most would already be sleeping. It was already rare to find anyone using the training grounds at this time of the night, but never the red-eyed woman never expected to witness a sparring session that was more akin to an all-out battle to the death. The training ground was small, consisting of mostly a small section of clearing, surrounded by trees. Potholes were everywhere, shuriken and kunai all over the place. The ground was cracked, rubble was scattered around, small trenches and craters decorated the small section of clearing, and many of the surrounding trees were collapsed and burned, a sign of the use of Kaiden Jutsu. And in the center of all the destruction, lay Naruto unmoving, obviously too exhausted to move. It had taken Kurenai some time to locate the boy, as he had not been at his apartment as she had originally thought. Though she eventually tracked him down to one of his usual training spots. She had hidden herself from view, quietly observing his training. She had only came in time to catch the tail end of the fight, but the ferocity and sheer intensity of the training worried her. It was much more intense than any training she had put her team through, or would willingly put them through. She had known he was hardworking ever since she had started teaching him. But this was complete recklessness. One wrong move, and he could have been severely injured or even killed. She had wanted to cut in to stop the training, but did not want to get in the crossfire of jutsu and weapons. Surprising ninja in deep concentration would have been unwise as it could invoke negative reflexive responses, such as throwing weapons at the object of their surprise. In this case, which would be her? But seeing the boy collapse to the ground, Kurenai immediately moved to check on him. Chakra exhaustion ranged from mild to severe, and in the worst cases, could even be life-threatening. Kneeling down next to the blonde, she whispered his name softly. Naruto. The blonde turned his head in her direction, meeting her worried eyes. Naruto lifted himself a little so he could sit upright. Kurenai gasped as she saw the heavily troubled look on his face that seemingly made him look much older than he was. And the slightly darkened bags under his eyes showed his lacking sleep. Naruto. You shouldn't train like this. You could have hurt yourself. It's late. You should be at home, getting some sleep. Kurenai chided concernedly. I couldn't sleep, Naruto mumbled under his breath, his eyes on the floor and his voice sounding quite hoarse. Kurenai frowned, and it was then that she knew she had been right to find the boy. She remembered that she too had trouble sleeping after making her first kill. He looked like he really needed someone to talk to. Kurenai paused slightly to gather her thoughts so she could find a good way to approach the topic, as she knew that despite how much he needed it, he didn't want to talk about it. It was clear to her now that he had been releasing pent-up emotions through training. And seeing him in such a miserable state made it clear how troubled he really was. His eyes were dull, the usual fire in them was gone. She hated to see the normally strong-willed boy like this. Kurenai cursed Kakashi for not helping the boy as his sensei. Though she knew that Kakashi had never been good at, or comfortable with emotional talks. Swallowing dryly, she realized that she was still undecided on how to start the conversation. The beautiful Junin knew that being blunt or overly forceful in trying to get him to open up would only make the boy feel worse. She could only offer him an ear to listen. Naruto, I've heard from Kakashi about your mission, Kurenai began cautiously with a soft voice. Naruto remained silent. Do you want to talk about it? Kurenai offered gently. Naruto remained silent, still looking down at the ground, never once making eye contact. Kurenai was patient, and waited for him to speak on his own. For some time, they remained completely silent, before Naruto finally let loose his troubles to his sensei. He told her everything, from his fight with Haku, to making the killing blow, and then killing Gato. He told her how the mission had completely changed his view of the shinobi profession. He had been woken from a fantasy world, and reality had shaken him to the core. He had lost all confidence in himself, and his future as a shinobi was in doubt. He used to ache for higher level missions, and fights with powerful ninja. But he realized that the reality of ninja battle can be cruel. And the consequences were not always what you expect, and rarely ends up a happy ending. Naruto knew that he could not continue as he used to, having lost his innocence. But if he continued to be a ninja, he wasn't sure if he could do what needed to be done when the time comes. If he was forced into the same situation once more, could he kill again? His view of the ninja world had been in terms of black and white, where those who were evil are his enemy, and those that are good were his allies. And before the mission, he had thought that he would have no qualms in killing his enemies, because they were evil. But he never realized that it was not always the case. At the time, he knew that his sense of justice would never allow him to let Zabuza succeed in killing Tazuna. Yet, despite being enemies, Haku was not evil. They became enemies only due to a conflict of interest and circumstance. If he was forced into the same situation, knowing that he had to kill someone like Haku, could he do it? The guilt of taking Haku's life was already tearing him apart. He wanted to protect, not kill. But if he had to kill in order to protect, knowing he might kill someone that did not deserve to die, someone that he fought only due to circumstance, could he do it? Could you live with yourself if your friends and teammates died, all because you wouldn't kill, and knowing that you could have saved them if you did? Kurenai whispered, but it was thunder to Naruto's ears. She knew exactly what he was feeling. She had felt the same when she made her first kill. And her own sensei had asked her the exact same question. And now, she in turn would ask him the same. Naruto's head rose sharply, gasping in shock at her words. His dulled blue eyes made contact with his sensei's piercing red eyes. He swallowed dryly and repeated her question in his mind. Could I live with myself, if I failed to protect them because I won't kill? Naruto's face hardened. No, I can't. He had realized that he had come to the same conclusion at the time of the fight. He recalled that at the time, he was ready to bear the guilt of taking a life if it meant Sasuke and Sakura would be safe. Yet, after the fight, no matter what he did, he just couldn't convince himself that it had been the right decision. But now, he realized now, that he had done the right thing. Because Sasuke may not be alive now had he not done what he had. Kurenai smiled as the boy's resolve slowly started to return. But it faltered once more. While killing Haku had been a necessity, the circumstance in his killing of Gato was completely different. He had killed the tyrant in cold blood for having to kill Haku in vain, not because of his desire to protect. It was true he had used chakra from the 9 tails at the time, although he wasn't consciously aware of it until sometime afterwards. But he also couldn't deny the fact that he had been in control of himself, and had truly desired the crime lord's death. He had relished in killing the short man, and even taken pleasure in inflicting fear into Gato's crooks. He had felt no remorse at the time, as he was much too worried for his teammates. But in the aftermath, he was completely disgusted with himself. No matter the fact that the crime lord's death released an entire country from his iron-fisted rule, and no matter the fact that he was a hero to an entire country, he could not accept that as answer to the fact that he had enjoyed killing, if only for just a moment. I'm a monster, just like they say, a voice, barely a whisper escaped his lips. Kurenai's eyes widened. No, Kurenai told him firmly. But I killed Gato in cold blood. I even enjoyed it. He sniffled, letting out a choked sob, as he tried hard not to break down crying. He tried to look her in the eyes but flinched and turned away too ashamed to do so. Kurenai held her hands to his face, guiding his gaze to her own, so she could look into his eyes. Naruto tried to avert his eyes, unwilling to see a look of disgust in her eyes. His heart ached. He didn't know why, but her opinion meant everything to him, and he could not bear to be rejected. Look at me, Kurenai whispered softly in a caring tone. Naruto found himself unable to do so. Please, Kurenai pleaded. Eventually, Naruto reluctantly turned his eyes so he could gaze into pools of red. The look in her eyes was not what he had expected. A look of complete acceptance reflected back at him. His heart soared. Kurenai gave him with a serene smile in response to the look of hope in his eyes. You are not a monster. If you are, you won't be beating yourself up over it. You did a good thing. You saved the people of Wave. Kurenai told him firmly. Naruto felt happy, happier than he had felt for a long time. So happy, that he could not stop the tears from rolling down his face. Kurenai couldn't help but gather the fragile boy into her arms. He sobbed lightly into her shoulder, as she rubbed his back comfortingly in a circular motion. After some time, the sobbing died away. Kurenai tried to release the embrace, but found Naruto sleeping soundly in her arms. Kurenai smiled softly, thinking that he looked so peaceful and cute in his sleep. For the first time in weeks, his nightmares did not come. It was morning once more, and Team 7 found themselves waiting for their teacher who was late as usual. Naruto was deep in thought, recalling the night before. He had not remembered when he had fallen asleep, though he had woken in his bed feeling better rested than he had been in weeks. Not once had the nightmares bothered him. He was glad of his talk with Kurenai. He felt his troubles disappear as if a large weight had been lifted from his shoulders. His resolve had returned, perhaps even stronger than before, now that he had come to terms with having to kill. Naruto felt immensely grateful for Kurenai's support, and thought that he should do something nice for the woman. Not to mention he had wanted to make up for having missed her birthday celebration while he had been away in Wave on mission. Meanwhile Sakura watched Naruto with a small smile. She was glad to see the shine in his eyes return. But with Naruto deep in thought, and Sasuke quiet as usual, silence was shared between the teammates. And the silence was making Sakura uncomfortable and in her boredom became increasingly fidgety. Arrrrrrrg, Sakura screamed in frustration eventually. Why does that guy call us out and then make us wait? What about the feelings of a young maiden who overslept and couldn't finish blow drying her hair? Before the two boys could reply, high-speed movement could be felt. Turning their heads, they caught Kakashi appearing on a pillar above them in a blur. Morning everyone. Today, I got lost on the road of life. Liar. Sakura screamed. Well, anyway, this is sudden, but I've nominated you guys for the Chunin selection exam. Here are your applications. The team was speechless. But, this is just a nomination. It's up to you whether or not to take the exam. Those who wish to take it sign the applications and take them to room 301 of the Academy by 3 p.m. 6 days from now. That is all. And with that, the Junin disappeared in a puff of smoke, as suddenly as he appeared. Seeing the look of uncertain and insecure look on Sakura's face, Naruto gave her a reassuring smile. Don't worry Sakura, you'll be fine. Sakura gave the boy a grateful look, feeling much better at his words. Seeing his reassuring smile, she couldn't help but feel safe and secure. You plan to take the Chunin exam with that? Mocked one of the pair of Konoha genin that had been blocking the doorway to the room, as he punched another genin to the floor that tried to approach. You guys should quit now, the genin blocking the way spat. You're just little kids. Please let us through, pleaded a girl who was dressed in a pink shirt and had hair in two buns. She helped her teammate off the floor, the boy that was punched to the floor. He was a goofy-looking boy with a bowl cut and massively thick eyebrows. But more outstandingly, dressed in green spandex. The bun-haired took the silence from the genin as agreement and walked forward, only to receive a fist to the face knocking her to the ground. Horrible, a voice murmured from among the gathered crowd of Chunin hopefuls. Listen, we're being kind. The Chunin exams isn't easy, the genin that threw the punch said. A lot of people in this exam will end up quitting as shinobi. And some others won't even be able to recover at all. We've seen it many times, his teammate added. Chunin are military platoon captains. The failure of a mission, the death of a soldier are all part of the captain's responsibility. Yet kids like you think. The genin snorted, not even bother finishing. We're just thinning out those that will fail anyway. What's wrong with that? Sasuke moved through the crowd with Sakura and Naruto trailing him. I agree, but you'll let me pass. And remove this genjutsu created surrounding. I'm going to the third floor. Confused whispers were shared among the crowd around them. Naruto rolled his eyes slightly. We could have just walked to the real room 301. But no, he had to show off. We could have eliminated a lot of competition. But then again, if they can't spot this genjutsu, they aren't much of a threat to us. His eyes then turned to the three at the front of the crowd beside them. He narrowed his eyes at the team that just had two of their members knocked to the floor by the genin that was blocking the door. There's no way a Hyuga can't see through a genjutsu of this level. That team must be faking it to hide their strength. So you noticed. One of the genins blocking the doorway spoke. Sasuke smirked in triumph. Sakura, you must have noticed it first, right? Your analytical ability and genjutsu know-how are the most improved on our team. Naruto hid a smirk of his own at Sasuke's words. He had been keeping his genjutsu training with Kurenai a secret as his trump card. Though he was glad Sasuke had also noticed Sakura's waning confidence and used this opportunity to help her regain some of that confidence she had lost. Sakura smiled slightly at being praised, finding herself feeling much more confident than before. Thank you, Sasuke-kun, the girl whispered under her breath. She looked up, this time with a confident expression. Of course I noticed. Because this is the second floor. The genins blocking the door smirked and released their genjutsu. Not bad. But all you did was see through it. The genin called out, while sending a kick straight at Sasuke. Having remained alert since the start of the confrontation, Sasuke returned a kick of his own back at his attacker. But before either blow landed, it was intercepted by the unassuming boy that was dressed in the green spandex. Fast, Sakura thought, in slight awe of the speed this genin had moved. Naruto raised an eyebrow. He's pretty fast. I was right, he had been faking to hide his strength. Sasuke frowned. He intercepted my kick. The teammates of the spandex-wearing boy moved up beside him. Hey, what happened to the plan? You're the one who said we shouldn't draw attention to ourselves, the Hyuga genin questioned. Well, the boy replied sheepishly, not knowing what to say. The boy then turned and looked to Sakura with admiration in his eyes. His female teammate shook her head. Oh no. My name is Rock Lee. So yours is Sakura. His smile brightened, as he gave a thumbs up in a pose that was as stupid as he looked. Let's go out together. I'll protect you until I die. Sakura's jaw dropped. No way, you're lame, she deadpanned. The boy in spandex bowed his head depressed at her rejection. Sasuke and Naruto stared on dumbfounded, both finding the scene amusing. No way I'll go out with you. That haircut, those eyebrows, ew, Sakura thought in disgust. Hey you, what's your name? The Hyuga boy spoke to Sasuke in a demanding tone. When you want to learn someone's name, you should give yours first, Sasuke retorted arrogantly, not liking the Hyuga's tone one bit. The Hyuga frowned at the Uchiha's response. You're a rookie, right? How old are you? He questioned again with the same demanding voice. I don't have to answer you, Sasuke scoffed. The Hyuga narrowed his eyes in anger. What? The girl with the hair in the buns smiled, but rolled her eyes slightly at the exchange between the two arrogant boys. How cute. But, she turned to look at the blonde and pink-haired genin that stood beside Sasuke. Her teammate Hyuga Neji had obviously gained an interest in the Uchiha survivor. As his teammate, she decided to scope out the Uchiha's teammates just in case they were a threat. She gave the pink-haired girl a quick once-over, but found nothing special. In fact, the girl looked weak. The girl seemed to be the type of kunoichi that cared more for her looks than her ability as a ninja. And as a kunoichi that was very serious about her career, she immediately found a small dislike for the pink-haired girl. The blonde on the other hand gave mixed signals. The way his gaze landed on her team had been somewhat unnerving, giving her a feeling that he might have been analyzing them, just as she was analyzing him. On the other hand, the cheery and carefree expression on his face revealed none of that, and the relaxed posture and stance he held gave an impression that he was weak. And being the Uchiha's teammate, he would have likely been the dead last of his class, suggesting that he wasn't much of a threat to her team. It was a shame as she found the boy to be kind of cute. Though skill and strength were attributes that she looked for in potential boyfriends, and the blonde boy despite being physically cute seemed to lack these attributes. But then again, looks can be deceiving, considering her teammate Lee's progress since her team started. It would not be wise to completely discount them so early. After all, this was the famous Hitaki Kakashi's genin team. Feeling the stare of the bun-haired girl, Naruto turned to the girl making eye contact. Smiling slightly, he gave her a small wink before looking back at the confrontation between the Hyuga and Uchiha prodigies, making the girl blush slightly. At least he knows how to flirt, unlike Lee, or Neji, the bun-haired girl mused. Eventually, the Hyuga and Uchiha boys broke eye contact from their attempt to gauge the other's strength. Sasuke turned to leave, with Naruto and Sakura following closely behind. Team 7 stared in awe as they found themselves facing a large crowd of over 100 genin. Having been possibly the last team to arrive, it served to freak them out a bit as they stood at the center of attention. The sense of hostility that permeated the entire room intimidated them, and even though Naruto felt confident of his strength, he couldn't help but feel a bit unnerved at the glares sent their way. The blonde's eyes swept from left to right, scanning through the crowd of genin, getting a feel of the level of competition they would have in the exam. Like Kurenai had taught him, his eyes drifted from genin to genin, trying to determine the strengths and weaknesses of each shinobi that he could see. However, those who were the greatest of threats stuck out like a sore thumb, to those that knew how to look. All one needed to look for, was the confidence in each shinobi. Barely repressed killing intent, the air of danger that was suffocating and the sheer intensity of the glaring eyes of the gathered ninja made it impossible for the weak to remain composed. Despite the gathered ninja being supposedly the cream of crop of their respective village, only a handful of ninja held themselves with absolute confidence. Most seemed to hide their nervousness behind a false mask of confidence by emitting a small amount of killing intent. The greatest threat, however, lay in the rare few shinobi that remained completely calm and unwavering even within this kind of oppressive atmosphere. Naruto's eyes instantly settled onto the first of such ninja. Rock Lee. The green-clad ninja, though silly-looking and fairly unassuming, could be considered an embodiment of the expression that looks could be deceiving. Despite his looks, there was one thing that was certain. He is undoubtedly strong. On their way to the room, Sasuke had been challenged to a fight by this one genin. The fight lasted mere moments, ending with the Uchiha utterly decimated and humiliated. Had he not witnessed the outcome of the fight firsthand, he would be hardly convinced if told that Lee was incredibly powerful. But despite Sasuke's loss to this genin, they were able to garner valuable information about Lee. Not that the boy with thick eyebrows bothered much to hide that he was in fact a taijutsu specialist. Lee had even announced that loudly at one point during the fight. Which Naruto found amusing as it served to further incense the Uchiha. Even with his bloodline limit, Sasuke was unable to come close to defeating Lee. The gap between their abilities was too large, the boy was simply too fast and skilled for Sasuke. Naruto understood that in terms of taijutsu, his skill was well below the older genin. And beating the boy they now dubbed Fuzzy Eyebrows in sheer speed was highly unlikely, as he seemed to specialize in speed. Even though he could easily match the boy's display of speed in the quick fight, Lee was definitely hiding his true speed. However, taijutsu specialists are usually more susceptible to genjutsu, although it was not always the case. But for Naruto, who had been secretly learning the art of genjutsu, it was an advantage that he held over the older genin. Still, Lee was undoubtedly a large threat to their team's success in this exam, and was definitely someone they needed to watch out for. The blonde's eyes then moved to the raven-haired genin standing beside Lee. The distinctive pale eyes instantly identified him as a Hyuga. Like his teammate, he held himself with complete confidence, with a tinge of arrogance. Naruto was well aware of the strength of the Hyuga clan. He had at one point researched the Juken taijutsu style in hopes of furthering his own taijutsu training. Although in the end, there hadn't been much he had discovered of the style, except one thing. Fighting in close combat with any Hyuga would be pure folly. On top of the style, there was the advantage of the Byakugan bloodline limit that makes them almost impossible to catch off guard. Naruto also recalled the fact that Lee had mentioned before offhandedly that his teammate was perhaps the strongest Konoha genin in the exam. It would be imperative for him if he even faced Neji, that he fought using his only advantage. Ninjutsu. Despite their superiority in taijutsu and strength as a clan, the Hyuga clan's arrogance and confidence in their techniques prevents them from studying other techniques. If given the chance, Naruto decided that he should observe the Juken fighting style in order to learn its secrets. Naruto's eyes then turned to the final member of Lee and Neji's team. It was difficult to determine the exact abilities of the girl, as she seemed somewhat plain and unassuming, even though she was kinda cute in a girl next door kind of way. She did not stand out among the crowd, being somewhat tomboyish, hidden among bloodthirsty ninja. But given what he knew of the girl's teammates, the logical conclusion would suggest that she would be a mid to long-range fighter, as both Neji and Lee are close combat specialists. She was either someone that uses genjutsu or mid to long-range ninjutsu for support, or was an expert marksman. Despite the fact that he could not clearly gauge her strength, she was clearly the weakest of the team, seeing as she did not held herself with the same level of confidence as her teammates. But then, there was hardly any other team within the room that could even consider challenging this team with all their skills together. Naruto's eyes then traveled through the crowd, finally settling on the next several genins that was a threat. It was the Suna team he had bumped into several days earlier. Like Rock Lee's team, the entire team of Suna genin exuded an aura of dangerousness without actively trying to appear so. But despite that, it was the redhead that garnered most of his attention. Sabaku no Gaara. Despite his short and skinny frame, his presence just screamed danger. It wasn't something one could really sense or see, but affects on a subconscious level. He didn't know why, but something about the redhead makes him wary, much more so than both Neji and Lee combined. Though the blonde had to wonder whether he was just paranoid, as he seemed to be the only one being wary of a small thin kid. With the emotionless visage, there was nothing that could be discerned of his personality or abilities. Nevertheless, even without any evidence whatsoever, his instincts tell him that Gaara's threat level was the highest among the entire crowd. Definitely someone to watch out for, and to stay away from, unless confrontation was unavoidable. Just as Naruto was about to move on to analyze the rest of the crowd of exam participants, a loud voice called out from beside him. Sasuke-kun, you're late. Looking out the corner of his eyes, he was treated to the sight of one Yamanaka Ino glomping Sasuke from behind, having jumped onto his back. I haven't seen you for a while. I've been so excited, Ino said, relishing the fact she was holding onto her crush. While the blonde pony-tailed girl was happy for Sasuke's presence, sadly the said boy did not feel the same. The raven-haired boy sported an irritated look that made him look like he was going to kill someone. And as much as the Uchiha tried to shrug the girl off his shoulders, Ino did not even budge. She was stronger than she looked, considering how thin she was, and maintained a tight grip on him. Naruto gave the boy an amused grin, which gained him a death glare in return. His other teammate, however, was far from amused, and let her opinion know quite vocally. What are you doing? Ino pig. Get away from Sasuke-kun. Sakura cried out in outrage. Why if it isn't Sakura? Big ugly forehead as always, Ino teased. What did you say? Sakura growled indignantly. Sasuke-kun is mine. Blah. Ino mocked, making a face at the pink-haired girl with her tongue sticking out. Well, everyone is here. A new voice comments. The group turned to face the source of the new voice only to see Inuzuka Kiba, who had his dog Akamaru sitting on top of his head. Behind the Inuzuka was his two teammates Hyuga Hinata and Aburame Shino. Geez. You guys too, Nara Shikamaru said, as he approached the group, having followed Ino. So all 9 of this year's rookie genin are taking the exam, Kiba comments, feeling proud that he was allowed to participate as a rookie genin, which goes to show his level of skill. I wonder how far we'll get. Sasuke, Kiba challenged. PFF'd. You seem confident, Kiba, Sasuke scoffs. We did a lot of training, we won't lose to you, Kiba brags. Sasuke scoffs at that. So, where's that idiot Naruto? Ino quipped. Sakura pointed to the blonde who had been beside them all along, with a deadpan look on her face. Ino blinked, then jaw dropped. Her turquoise eyes widened to bizarre proportions as she took in the form of the blonde boy whom she had always known to be an idiot. Pointing to the boy in disbelief, she stuttered, T.S.N. To say Naruto had changed was an understatement. It had only been 6 or so months since she had last seen him. But where he would have been a target of ridicule in terms of his lack of height a few months ago, he now stood at a respectable height for someone their age. Although he was still not quite as tall as the taller of the boys of their class. It also seemed that the boy had suddenly gained a sense of fashion, as he had abandoned the orange eyesore, and replaced it with a rather nice white coat that reached his knees. His hair was longer, making some shadow, which hid a bit of his eyes, giving him a slightly mysterious feel. Behind the golden locks of hair were deep blue eyes that shined with warmth and a tinge of playfulness. His face was sharper, making him look more mature and serious, having lost some baby fat that used to make him cute in a childlike way, no doubt, the result of intense training. And that grin, which she had always though as cute in a childish and silly kind of way, now seemed oddly seductive. She couldn't help but feel the warmth build in her cheeks. Ino really wanted to berate herself as she caught herself checking out the dead last idiot. As much as she liked Sasuke, she couldn't even remember the last time looking at Sasuke had made her blush as much as she was now. Still, part of her stubborn mind argued that Sasuke was still much better looking. It wasn't exactly false. Given several more years, then perhaps Naruto could rival Sasuke in the looks department, but there was no denying that Sasuke was better looking at the moment. But another part of her mind found the wild blonde hair and a warm gaze was more to her tastes in contrast to the cold gazes from the Uchiha. A gaze from deep blue eyes that was currently looking at her with an intensity that sent shivers down her spine. And what was that glint in his eyes? While Ino was taking in the sight that was Naruto, the said boy gave the speechless girl a mischievous grin. It was oddly gratifying to have a member of the opposite S*X, and one as beautiful as Ino to find him attractive. And even though it had been an increasingly common sight ever since his change in wardrobe, it was still a massive boost to his ego. He had to force himself not to blush from Ino's stare. That was until his prankster nature kicked in. Striding up beside his fellow blonde, he placed an elbow on her shoulder while leaning his face towards her face. Ah, I'm so disappointed you don't recognize little ol' me, Ino-chan, Naruto said jokingly and teasingly, knowing for sure that his close proximity and the way he called her name would serve to further fluster the girl, having seen her earlier reaction. Ino's blush deepened much to Naruto's delight. Ino had always been extremely proud of her own looks, and loved to flaunt it and often took amusement in making the boys blush with a little flirting. And now, Naruto was giving her a taste of her own medicine. Is that a blush I see? Naruto teased again, finding the irony to be incredibly funny. Her blush now resembled the ripest of tomatoes. And the girl looked away slightly, unable to meet his eyes, causing Naruto to chuckle slightly. Desperate to hide her embarrassment, she did the only thing she knew that would work in this situation. Lashing out, she smacked Naruto in the head and grabbed his collar, and yelled loudly into his face. What the hell you trying to imply? However, the blush on her face remained. Naruto just chuckled and lifted his hands in a gesture of surrender. Beside them, Sakura was fuming mad and more than a little envious of the blonde girl. Naruto had not referred to her with such endearment for some time, and hearing Naruto call her greatest rival that brought a twinge to her heart. The pink-haired girl had not been envious of Ino for quite some time. She had believed that she had grown out of the blonde girl's shadow and had gained some confidence in her own self-worth. When they had been younger, she had not been very confident of herself, and had looked up to Ino as the most beautiful and ladylike as well as the most talented kunoichi their age. She had eventually gained confidence in herself as she grew older and thought that the gap between them had closed and believed herself to be just as beautiful and as good a kunoichi. Now seeing Naruto flirt with Ino rather than herself had hurt. Was Ino that much more attractive and desirable than she was? She had witnessed Naruto flirt with several other girls, but how many months had it been since he even paid her any extra attention? Watching Naruto and Ino now made her wanted to cry. Even if Sasuke was the one she wanted to be the one that Naruto paid attention to, not these other girls. As Naruto tried to placate Ino, Kiba spoke. Ha! Just because you changed your clothes doesn't mean you aren't Adobe. Naruto-kun, Hinata whispered softly with a blush on her cheeks, from her position beside Kiba. Naruto was about to make a retort to Kiba's statement when a new voice cut in, making Ino release Naruto. Hey you guys, you should be more quiet. The entire group of rookies turned from the spectacle that was the two blondes, towards the new arrival. The owner of the voice was a boy with gray hair that wore a pair of glasses. He seemed to be several years older than they were. You guys are rookies just out of the academy, right? The boy says. Who are you? Ino asks bluntly. I'm Kabuto. But look behind you, Kabuto pointed. The rookie genin did as Kabuto advised and found the entire crowd of genin glaring at them, with the stares of the genin from Aim the Fiercest, as if they were ready to go on the kill. Those guys behind you are from the Hidden Rain, they have short tempers. Everyone is nervous about the exam, quiet down before you cause a scene, Kabuto advised in a matter-of-fact tone. Well, I can't blame you guys. You're all rookies after all. Reminds me of how I used to be, Kabuto stated offhandedly. So this is your second time, Kabuto-san? Sakura asked politely to the stranger. No, this is my 7th time, Kabuto said casually, not at all embarrassed that he had failed that many times. This exam is held twice a year, so this is my 4th year. Wow, so you know a lot about this exam? Sakura questioned. That's right, Kabuto states proudly. I'll share some info with you cute rookies. With these Nin info cards, Kabuto says as he flipped out a deck of cards. Nin info cards? Sakura questioned. Kabuto places the deck on the floor, and the gathered rookie genins crowded around in a circle surrounding Kabuto, trying to satiate their curiosity. They are basically cards which have info burned onto them with chakra, Kabuto replies. I have 4 years worth of info here, over 200 cards. They look blank, but to open the info on these cards, Kabuto grabbed the card from the top and placed it info side up, and spun in on the tiled floor with a finger. What are you doing? Sakura asks curiously. You can't view them unless I use my chakra. With a poof of smoke, diagrams and writing revealed itself on the card. This is the number of genin taking the exam, and the breakdown of what country they are from, Kabuto says. Do you have cards with info on individuals? Sasuke asked, curious of the data Kabuto had gathered. Is there someone you are worried about? Kabuto says, my info on this exam's participants isn't perfect, but I do have it. Even you guys. Pick someone and I'll take a look. Rock Lee of Konoha, Sasuke says. Oh, you know the name. It'll be easy then, Kabuto say. In a blur of hands, Kabuto retrieved a single card from the deck. Show me, Sasuke demanded, hoping to gain any info that could help him defeat the genin that defeated him so easily. Okay, Rock Lee, he's a year older than you guys. Mission history is 20D rank, 12C rank completed. Sensei is Meta guy. His taijutsu have improved greatly in this year, the rest is nothing impressive. He gained some attention last year as a talented new genin, but he didn't participate in the Chunin exam. So this is his first time like you guys. His teammates are Hyuga Neji and Tenten. Is there anyone else? Kabuto asks after letting the rookies absorb the info. All of the rookies shook their heads, but one voice called out from among them. Sabaku no Gaara. The genin looked to Naruto in surprise, especially with the unusually serious tone. Not to mention the said blonde was staring directly at the redhead among the crowd that was also staring back intently. Sabaku no Gaara. Mission history, 8C rank, and 1B rank. Wow, a B rank mission as a genin. I don't have much info since he's newcomer to the exams from a foreign country. But, it seems he returned from all of his missions without even a scratch. Naruto's eyes narrowed. As expected, this Gaara was good. B-ranked missions were assigned to Junin level ninja. It was unlikely that the boy had gotten lucky, although not entirely impossible. After all, Sakura had technically completed an equivalent of an A-class mission without a scratch in the mission to Wave, as she did not fight at all. But considering the way the boy bossed his teammates around, it meant that he was definitely the most powerful of the group. It wasn't possible that only luck was involved. Which meant Gaara was at least close to Junin level. Despite his nervousness, his blood boiled in excitement. Naruto smirked. He looked